years we've had. Students and staff are thrilled to be back together and truly getting back to a sense of a normal year. Our athletics teams are back to a normal schedule of events, and our new 8-man football team format has already paid off with a win over Richmond Christian School last Friday night. This marked the first win for our RCPS varsity football team since 2019. We're very excited. The excitement on the field was certainly contagious, and all of those of us in the stands. Our marching band performed their first movement in their repertoire and will travel to Madison County on Thursday for an exhibition. Senior activities have begun, as well as the tradition of the rock painting taking place last week, along with seniors being able to paint their individual parking spots. The seniors also gathered to begin a new tradition, a senior sunrise gathering where seniors congregated at the high school at dawn, with staff, of course, prior to sunrise to cook breakfast, reflect on their time together, and set goals for the coming year. The RCPS communications team and athletics department are spearheading a fun school spirit building contest to name our Panther. Students of all ages are eligible to apply through a link provided through email and posted on social media. The contest is open to homeroom and seminar classes to submit a group entry as well. The contest will close on September 12th, and a survey will then open up to the community to help us pick the name, which will be revealed on our October 14th homecoming football game. The winning student or class will receive a t-shirt with the new name, an ice cream party for the class if it was a class entry, or an ice cream gift certificate for an individual, and recognition at our homecoming game. We look forward to the naming of our Panther. On Friday, September 2nd, RCHS students participated in the highly anticipated Pride, Positive Relationships Inspire a Drive for Excellence Club Kickoff Day. Students gathered in the gym and browsed various options before signing up for the club of their choice. This year's clubs included a wide range of topics to appeal to a variety of interests. Some of those options were several game-based topics such as strategic gaming, curious minds, puzzles, Sudoku, crosswords, etc., Minecraft, House of Cards. The sports and physical activity options were tennis club, walk with courage self-defense class, skate club, self-care, yoga club, kickball club, basketball, ultimate frisbee, and I'm going to say this wrong, cube? Nordic lawn game. Finally, other club options include coloring club, drama club, field trip club, French club, anime club. So lots of different club choices, anything you could imagine for these kids. After each student had a chance to select their top pick, the clubs then competed in various fun team building activities out on the football field, and there were lots of laughs shared and memories made. Also backed by popular demand, Commit to be Fit free community fitness classes and wellness workshops are beginning this week. As before, all activities are offered free of charge for RCPS staff and the RAP community. Anyone 18 years or older can take part in those classes. We hope you will join us as well as we work towards our wellness goals together. The class schedule and calendar of special workshops can be found on the RCPS C2BF website, and that's at rapc2bf.com. I've also included the September division-wide events calendar for your convenience, so we encourage you to join us whenever you're available to cheer on your Panthers. They are doing so well. I've got a sticky note on my way out that JV and varsity volleyball are both 5-0, so that's wonderful. Next week, the school board will meet at 6:30 p.m. On Tuesday, September 13th, to discuss recently released school quality profile data. We will share a special spotlight of RCHS, and we also will have a special presentation of the resolution honoring former school resource officer Captain Jeff Brown. We thank you so much for your continuous support of the school system, and we would not be nearly as successful as we are without that help and support, so thank you so much. Do you have any questions for me?
No, thank you though.
You can thank my vacation on the Middle Fork of the Salmon for the cube, which my wife is doing. It's a Viking strategy game thing that we played on the rafting trip. So.
It looked like so much fun, really.
Thank you very much for the calendar of events.
I did want to ask and expose my ignorance, but just nod and smile.
That's right.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Grimsley. All right, we have an introduction. Would you like to make
Yes, I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Bonnie Jewell as our new Assistant County Administrator. She'll be starting next Monday. She graciously agreed to come join us today so she can make a formal introduction. allow the board possibly to ask a few questions, allow her to say a few things. As you've all read recently, Bonnie comes to us by way of Arlington Public Schools in Spotsylvania County as their Assistant County Administrator for Finance and Services. And I can tell you, I'm very excited to bring her on board, expand her capacity, and start taking care of some of these items, backlogged items the board would like to address. I guess you're up.
Okay, and with that, I'll just say I'm very pleased to be here. Last time I was in this room, it was early one winter morning, about 5:30, and my younger sister, who's a police officer in Harrisonburg, and I were about to engage with Sheriff Compton for the Shop with a Deputy program. And then the time before that was when I was about 16, being issued my driver's license. So let's hope that aside from these meetings, that's the only reason for me to be in this room.
I look forward to you being in this room many more times.
Yes, me as well. We've already had the pleasure to meet so many nice people today, and was very pleased that Peggy Ralph and Diane Bruce came to visit earlier. Those are folks that I've known for a very long time, and in fact, my mother worked with them in the clerk's office for years. So it's great to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity so much.
Thank you very much. Welcome home.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Welcome home. Thank you very much for taking the position, and I'm really looking forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm very much looking forward to it too. So I was telling somebody earlier, I think the concepts of local government from one spot to another are different, but obviously, or are the same. But obviously, there are some very different particulars, and I'm looking forward to learning more about the particulars.
Yeah, and I think what comforts me the most is that we don't have to explain to you what it means to be from Rappahannock or what Rappahannock is all about. You're from here, and so you know better than me what that means. So that's great comfort to me, and I'm sure the citizens.
Yes, thank you. I'm definitely from here. I grew up in Scrabble. I graduated from Rappahannock High School. And again, thank you so much.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
All right, next we have Mr. LaGraff with the Rappahannock Community Services. This is our annual update, I think.
Your annual update. You get to hear me once a year do this. So I tried to make it a lot shorter for this year. And I put together a supplement, just a lot of information, a lot has happened this year to help you out, so you don't have to listen to me talk for so long. So, okay.
Maybe. There we go.
All right, I do need to actually just start my presentation this year to acknowledge the staff of our organization. Again, we've now, the second year, 2.5 years now of this pandemic, and I think as you will see, the demands on the staff of our organization have increased dramatically in the past couple of years. And I just can't tell you how much these staff have stepped up and the excellent job they've done over the last couple of years. So publicly thanking them. So the year in review, really the year was a lot about challenges. And as the information that we will review, I think it's just important to put back into a little bit of context. This was the fiscal year that ended on June 30th for us, and the reporting year that ended on June 30th. But our planning for this year obviously started 1.5 years before that. So a lot of our planning for this report was done prior to even the term Delta. So I think that helps put it in perspective. You know, we thought at that point in time we were coming out of the pandemic and had planned a gradual roll-up for services, then the Delta variant hit, and it really did affect us dramatically. And so the pandemic continued. Last fiscal year, our fees for services were about $1,500,000 under what we had projected. Along with that, we also saw a dramatic increase in community need. We saw in our planning district, and again, we are the 5-county planning district 9, 59 fatal overdoses last calendar year. That is a 34% increase. We don't have a huge population, and 59 fatal overdoses is pretty dramatic. Almost all of those fatal overdoses are fentanyl related in our 5-county area. Additionally, last year, we saw a 34% increase in emergency custody orders. Again, those are the instances where law enforcement is bringing someone to us who is in a behavioral health crisis. And so we see a 36% increase in those. We see a 34% increase in overdoses. Additionally, I think everyone is aware of staffing shortages that have really hit every single industry in our area and nationally. And so staffing shortages at both the state and local level really did hamper some of our ability to respond and to react to, again, a lot of what was happening locally. We saw gas prices skyrocket, which put a huge burden on our staff. Again, I really want to commend our board for acting very quickly and approving an emergency stipend for our staff, who do a lot of driving throughout the 5-county area. And all those things, I think the pandemic continuation, the increase in demand, the rising inflation and gas prices, we really did see very significant staff fatigue start to hit the organization in the last year. On top of all that, we saw a lot of changes within the organization. We have a lot of new people in leadership roles within the organization. We brought on an associate executive director, a woman named Cheryl Reinstrom. Our director of finance retired after 34 years with the organization, so we have a new finance director. Our IT director, after 33 years with the organization, retired, so we had a new IT director, and you can see some other ones throughout the organization. So we had a lot of leadership change within the organization. Additionally, with the new administration coming in Richmond, we have a new commissioner of behavioral health. We have a whole new structure in Richmond that we have to work with. Creates a lot of uncertainty, a lot of change within our system. And other changes, we continue to see the response at and I apologize for the acronyms, I try not to use them, but you just get so in the habit of writing DBHDS, it's the Department of Behavioral Health Developmental Services. We continue to see a movement at Richmond at the Department of Behavioral Health level to regionalize programs. And when we talk regionalized programs, we are talking about services, not what I would consider our region, which is the 5 counties, but what the Department of Behavioral Health considers a region is Health Planning Region 1. Those are 9 community service boards. That is from Winchester to Lynchburg to Stanton to Fredericksburg. It is a huge geographic area. And so we see the Department of Behavioral Health looking to provide services out of regional offices. And unfortunately, being more rural in our areas, we are not seeing any of the benefit of those regional programs. Okay. In spite of all that, it was a year of tremendous growth for our organization. We opened the C Recovery Center in Culpeper. C stands for Support, Empower, Encourage. And our goal with the C Recovery Center is we know the biggest barrier for people to seek treatment from us is stigma. And we also know it's very difficult to initiate services. So we started a pilot program called the C Recovery Center. Really what we try to do here is have a barrier-free entry into services, helping reduce stigma and a non-hospital alternative to an individual in crisis. We opened on August 1st of last year, very little fanfare. We just, kind of a soft opening to see what would happen. In the first year the C Center has been open in Culpeper, we had over 10,000 visitors to that location. And I think it really demonstrates just the huge need we have in our region for services. We also, because the C Center is a non-licensed, it is kind of a different model. It's a peer-run program with licensed clinical support services wrapping around. Because it is a very different model and people are free to come and enter into services, we're also very free to be very mobile in the service offerings that we offer at that location. So last year, when we got the word that we had 59 fatal overdoses that were mainly fentanyl related, we very quickly were able to offer fentanyl test strips as part of a harm reduction kit to people who come into the C Recovery Center. So, and if you're not familiar with fentanyl test strips, it's basically just what it sounds. It's a testing strip where people who are using can actually test what they are using to see if they have fentanyls in them. Study upon study shows if people test, they use less, they moderate less, and they're much more likely to come into treatment. So really the idea is we offer these kits, people come in, it is anonymous, they get a kit. Our goal is we keep people alive long enough so we can get them into treatment. They keep coming back for more kits. Eventually our peers are able to get their hooks into them. And we have seen When we started these programs, less than 40%, it was like 32% of the people who were coming in and interacting with our peer support specialists were in a formal treatment program. Less than a year later, that number is up to 80%. So we know it is a very effective way of getting people into treatment. We started a new program here at the Child Care Learning Center called Parent-Child Interactive Therapy, which is an evidence-based program to help parents and children, especially children who have really significant needs. We have started our Healthy Ideas program, which is for seniors in our community. We know depression and isolation is running very high in our senior community. So it's an outreach assessment program for seniors in our community. We transitioned our Liberty House program in Culpeper to be a hospital diversion point because we know the state hospital bed crisis is really creating huge burdens on law enforcement. We started the Zero Suicide Initiative. Our goal is one suicide is too many, and it's a philosophy and a program that we are implementing throughout our organization that we will spread through the community, really to how to recognize signs of suicide and how to help people through those times. And again, we implemented 2 specialty services through the Sept, Virginia, which is the behavioral health system's attempt to improve the quality of care in Virginia, targeting service veterans and military families, and peers and family support services. Again, some other growth areas, we partnered with another organization in Culpeper for what's called the Parkside Housing Development. It is an approved 37-unit low-income tax credit development that we will be building and construction and running in Culpeper County. We are developing a 20-unit, again, low-income tax credit program on Madison Street in Orange, in the village of Orange. We have received expanded housing voucher programs. Again, we all know we can provide all the treatment, but if you don't have stable housing, treatment doesn't work, right? We are working on what we call the Hospital Hill Project, which is the remodeling of our old behavioral health clinic on the grounds of Fauquier Hospital, which will be a long-term residential program for women who are in recovery from a substance use, and we hope to have that open in probably about a year for construction to be finally finished. We are purchasing an office location in Madison County, which will allow for local services in there. And again, our goal as an organization is to have functional service locations in every one of our 5 counties that we are working on. And we're working really hard to make that kind of a reality in Rappahannock County as well. Again, it was also a year of increased funding support, and I can't tell you how important local funding has been for us this year. We saw a 15%, almost a 16% local match dollar increase this year, which really helped us stabilize our workforce. I think we put in a living wage and a 5% increase in costs this year's budget. But throughout the entire course of the pandemic as an organization, we laid no one off. We did not cut anyone's hours back. Irregardless of program capacity at any given time, our staff knew they could rely on us for a paycheck. Again, Madison County gave us we have a service development with support from the Madison County, Orange County gifting us land in a building for the development in Orange County, and Fauquier County adding financial support to the Hospital Hill project. There was also a 12.5% increase in most Medicaid fees, which again allowed us to remain financially stable during this time. And we can go on. So with all of that as a backdrop, the numbers that we would report in our performance contract with the Department of Behavioral Health, and I'm not going to read through these charts, you have them, but basically what you see are 2 numbers. These are the numbers we have to report as part of our performance contract, and that I'm required to report to you on an annual basis of how many individuals we serve and how many in each of the kind of categories that the Department of Health requires. I always tell people, so the number on the right is the total for our organization. The number on the left is unique individuals in Rappahannock County. And Rappahannock County is about 4% of my population base. So if you're looking at numbers trying to make a comparison, I always tell people, while the numbers might demonstrate there's equity, if you're 4% of the population and we are serving 4%, you receive 4% of the number of people we are serving. That does not mean we are serving the needs of a community. Because I think we all are well aware there are much greater needs in our community than are being served at this point in time. Also, some of the numbers will be zero just because they're site-based services. So if you have a supportive residential service, we don't have that facility in Rappahannock County, so your number just becomes zero. But it doesn't mean we might not have served someone from Rappahannock County, but how you report it is differently. So, and you have those charts, so I won't bother going through those. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Lots of charts.
Lots of charts. So with all that as a backdrop, this year's budget preparation, again, our goals in our budget this year was to maximize compensation just for our staff in light of the current economic things. Doing so, we need to ensure that any salary increases we put in are sustainable. We also targeted our highest staff vacancy positions to relook at our wage scales to make sure that we were competitive in the marketplace, and then continuing to align our agency roles. Once again, we kept our employee healthcare contributions flat. We have been, over the last 3 or 4 years, really trying to make our healthcare for our employees much more competitive. We still have a significant distance to go. Our employee healthcare is much too expensive for our employees at this point in time. We had a significant investment in technology this year. We also, again, as an organization financially, budget very conservatively. Again, we don't know what's going to happen, so we always make sure everything is very conservative. This year, for the first time as an organization, we developed a separate capital budget, which we will talk about real briefly. And again, with all of this, without it reducing any current service levels or existing staff levels. So this year, fiscal year 23 budget came in at just a hair under $35 million. That's about a 10% increase for us. So we had a very significant growth this year. In the last 4 years, we've seen a 32% growth in our organization, but almost all of that, 29%, almost 30%, has been in the last 2 years. So the last 2 years have been really very significant for us as an organization. Again, just the highlights of where does our money go, or where does our money come from, our revenue sources. And again, we are a combination of state, local, federal, other sources, philanthropy, Medicaid transportation, some of those other types of things, and federal funds. And much easier. What I like about this chart is we are a very diversified funded organization, which I think is really very important. So we are not so reliant on local or state or federal funds that when something happens with one of those funds, it has a major effect on us as an organization. And I think, honestly, it makes us a little unique as an organization. If you look at the other community service boards around the state, you've seen a lot of program closures, a lot of reductions, because they are so dependent on either state revenues, predominantly state revenues, for the other organizations. So I think our diversity really is very important to us and our stability as an organization. So where does our money go? Predominantly, we are a human service organization, our money goes to staff. And just a graphical representation of that. And like I said, too, this for the first year, we created a separate capital budget. I think like many local governments and other organizations, we were the recipient of lots of ARPA funds over the last couple of years. Those are one-time funds, so they're really difficult to spend on like long-term staffing and those types of things. So what we have done with those funds this year is we are doing some renovations to Boxwood. Boxwood is our residential treatment program. And creating some additional beds at Boxwood, as well as a place for people can come and isolate before entering the general population, which will really help keep down any potential infections. Our Bridges site, which is our home for our intellectual and developmental disability services, is going through some renovations. We talked a little bit about the Madison project, the Hospital Hill, which is the residential treatment program. A lot of expenditure this year on IT infrastructure. Remote workforce, telehealth, all those types of things. Really, we were very much behind when the pandemic hit, and have played a lot of catch up over the last couple of years so that we can make sure we are taking care of all things like telehealth and mobile and remote and all those types of things, and some miscellaneous renovations and repairs. And as a reminder, you have cards that I've passed out. This year is our organization's 50th anniversary. We are having a free event for anybody who would like to attend on September 29th at 5 to 7:30 at Rock Hill Farms on Norman Road. So, please come, learn about us as an organization, and celebrate the last 50 years. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Thank you very much for that report. I do have a question about the seat facility.
Yes.
Did you guys have some kind of estimate on what you thought, how it would be used, and how many folks would come in?
No, we had none. We had a program that we were running that was using that facility. It was a program called psychosocial rehab. But the last several years, the Medicaid reimbursement rate for that program was the same rate that when the program started in the 1990s. It had not changed. It was a very regulated, very restricted program, and we were seeing about 50 unique individuals a year. And the year before last, we lost about $350,000, and it just wasn't viable to continue that program for the low number of people. We had an idea of opening up a site. Like we said, our goal was anybody who walks through the door. So if you come to the C Center, there's an iPad there. And it says, have you been here before? Yes or no. Do you live in one of these 5 counties? You click the county. And then one of the staff will say, congratulations, you are now eligible for all the services that we have here. And if you have ever experienced trying to enter publicly funded behavioral health services, the number one thing we hear all the time is it's too hard to get support and services. And so we really didn't have an idea. But the idea of creating a place for the recovery community. So we invited groups like Narcotics Anonymous and AA and Smart Recovery to actually hold meetings at our location. We started a morning group called Coffee and Conversation, where people in recovery could go, start their day, have a small support group. And so we had these little, I think we were kind of overwhelmed with the idea of how popular and how much of the need in this would spread. We thought we wouldn't have done it if we didn't think it was a good idea, but just the volume of people has been kind of overwhelming. Our goal was to make this a 24/7 program, and it's been so busy, we haven't been able to do that yet. But the other thing that is really, I think, unique is at the C Center, throughout the entire day, evidence-based practice that are led by clinicians or individuals who have been trained by clinicians are happening all day long. I will be honest, there is not a program like this in Virginia. We have been asked by the Department of Behavioral Health to demonstrate how we were able to financially make this work. And I'll be honest, there's about 50 different funding streams. It's everybody who had a nickel got thrown into this location to make this thing work. Next month, we are being visited by the Mental Health Association of America, who has viewed this program for their national staff retreat as the program to come and see and look at. It is very innovative. It is proving to be highly successful and really a very unique animal at this point in time.
Wow, that's incredible.
I think the gentleman that leads it, that came to the county and gave a presentation, his background, I think, has helped tremendously.
Yeah.
I think you share that with
Sure,
them.
yeah, so, well, there's 2 things. The C Recovery Center, the name C, we actually borrowed or used with permission from one of our board members of Orange County. He was a veteran who had trauma as a veteran and got involved with peer services at the Veterans Administration and actually crafted the Veteran X program, which is the national peer support program used at Veterans Administrations. He had actually trained one of my staff who was a veteran, who also had some substance abuse and trauma and those types of things from his military service in peer recovery services. That gentleman came to work for us years ago as a peer recovery specialist. He actually left us and became a master's levels licensed clinician and returned with this idea of peer and peer support services. So the person who really helped us design the program is an individual with lived experience. But again, the really unique part of the whole project is that peer, which is the lived experience, which we all know has shown the best entry into services is connection with a peer. But he's also a licensed clinician. So he has a clinical background for what is best practice and how things work best and what is the best treatment modalities. And so kind of bringing those two worlds together at this one location and really creating an environment between the clinical staff and the peers of it's not competitive, it's mutually beneficial to everybody, has really been kind of dramatic, which is, I think, really allowed it to be grow and successful as it's been.
Wow.
I invite anybody, if you want to come, if you've never been, it's a pretty amazing place if you've never walked in there. And it's not what you expect, is what I tell everybody all the time. If you've never been into the place, to actually see what is happening, I think a lot of our programs are like that, but to really see the interaction between people in the community who feel comfortable, who are willing to accept treatment, clinicians and people with lived experience all working together, I think it is pretty dynamic.
Is this something that you would want to do for other spots in the 5-county area? Or?
We are absolutely, it is something we want to spread to the other 5 county areas. Yep.
Excellent, well, thank you.
Yep.
I was going to ask, I know we have very active board members, which I'm grateful for, and you're making inroad in Madison, and so you mentioned CCLC. So is there a future plan, concepts?
There are lots of discussions. There are, I think there is one prominent discussion I think that everyone is aware of. That we have been in discussion with Rush River to see if that offers an opportunity for us. There are lots of benefits to that. There are also significant challenges for us as an organization. This board is generous enough, especially for our senior program, that we use the Scrabble School for our senior center. And there's really no cost to that for us. There is a significant cost that would come to us as an organization if the Rush River Commons current location and current iteration. That is a significant concern for us. We have come to this board, and the last 3 years, you guys have been phenomenal in supporting us as an organization. And I think we've been able to do very significant things to that. But we also know that it has to level off a little bit at some point in time, right? We are also in some other discussions of some other places. Our goal, like I said, is to have a physical site location where someone in Rappahannock County does not have to go to Culpeper or Warrenton for services.
And I think we've talked about this before, but I always feel like there are a couple of county offices that are underused, like the previous county administration building and also the visitor center. I mean, that's only used maybe on weekends now. But I mean, there certainly are places in the county that are county owned and are not used if it's a trial basis sort of thing that you all
And
are
I'll be happy, I'll
contemplating.
talk to Gary about that.
I think we've talked about this before, but.
One thing I was wondering is with the Commit to Be Fit program being so great, and it's also such a good thing for mental health. I was wondering if there was any, for the Rappahannock citizens anyway that are engaged, if there was any way to team up with the school on the Commit to Be Fit and get some of the people that are struggling into that program to possibly help them with mental health.
Okay. I mean, I think we're open to all that stuff all the time.
Yeah. All right. Good.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you, I appreciate it, thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Jeff.
Next, I see we have Steve Brewer on Zoom with us from CenturyLink Services. Hopefully he's got a great update for us.
Mr. Burr, it's confirmed we can hear you okay?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I certainly am excited about our move over to Brightspeed, and I'd like to give you a bit of an update there. And then we'll be happy to talk about the rehab project that is taking place in the county. So the transition to Brightspeed will officially take place on October 3rd. And as I sit with you today, I am still technically an employee of Lumen, and some of you know us as CenturyLink, Lumen being the parent company of CenturyLink. So on October 3rd, it will be day one for Brightspeed. And you will gradually see the CenturyLink branded equipment and vehicles in your communities rebranded over to Brightspeed. And please understand, this is a completely different company, completely different executive leadership team, and certainly the primary focus is to bring as many fiber connections as possible to the communities we serve. And that will take place with Brightspeed's own investment dollars as well as participation in broadband grants. And our executive leadership team, I do have the opportunity to meet with them frequently. They have a great deal of experience in the building of fiber optic networks and obviously in maintaining copper networks as we currently have deployed in much of Virginia. So, are there any questions regarding the transition to Brightspeed?
So it's my understanding that it will be completely transparent to the customer as far as billing and paying and their typical service for landline. Is that correct?
That's right. Certainly they will get notices of the transition to Brightspeed, and their billing statements will begin to see new logos, and those will certainly be branded as Brightspeed. But otherwise, there will not be any interruption of service or anything in that regard. So, in the state of Virginia, the service is officially provided by two different holding companies that do business as CenturyLink. Those holding companies will transition over as part of the purchase of assets. Those holding companies will transition over, and they will begin doing business as Brightspeed.
Thank you.
Any other questions regarding the transition to Brightspeed?
I just had a question. It sounds like it sounds like you're saying that there will be upgrades and that there will be more fiber installation throughout the county. Is that what you're saying?
That is the primary driver, as I understand it, in the transition of assets or the purchase of assets. Is Apollo Global Management is ultimately the I'll call it the investor that purchased these assets, and their desire is to bring as many fiber-based connections. They purchase local assets in 20 states, including the state of Virginia. So, and I will actually be transitioning over to Brightspeed October 3rd, effective October 3rd. But they have the desire to bring as many fiber connections to the local communities included in those assets as possible over the next 5 years is the horizon. I don't have build plans for each specific counties, but certainly that's their goal, and we look forward to bringing those services to our customers. And like I said, we will do so with Brightspeed investment dollars as well as participation in broadband grants.
That sounds great. I do want to just mention that as a rural county, sometimes we're challenged with cell phone coverage as well as landline connections. And so is there a way to keep an open line of communication as to when folks can expect service interruptions, or will there be service interruptions as part of this rollout?
I'm sorry, I lost you there for a second. You indicated that there was some lack of cell phone coverage in some areas.
We do have sparse cell phone coverage in some areas, in some of the areas that you serve in the county. And so I'm just wondering, when you do these upgrades, will there be service interruptions to your subscribers?
So in the connections that we're talking about building, they're going to be fiber connections that we will build. So it's basically an overbuild of an existing network. It's not It's not essentially an upgrade to an existing network, it's an overbuild of the existing network. That being the case, when fiber is built into an area, there should not be an interruption.
So minimal downtime.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Brewer, this is Van Carney from Stonewall Hawthorne. I just have a question. Some folks in the county have had a really, how should I phrase this? Poor history with CenturyLink, where people have lost, phone line access for weeks. What can folks expect here in this county with landlines moving forward under your new ownership and leadership?
Well, certainly, I know that there has been concern with the level of investment made in communities over the past few years, and I certainly understand that. As part of our joint stipulation with the Virginia Service Commission, there is reporting as it pertains to telephone lines, telephone service, that is ongoing as part of that. Also, as part of that, there was a copper rehabilitation program, and your county was impacted by that copper rehabilitation program. Year over year, after that program has been completed, the program was actually completed in July of this year. We did experience a 20-hour improvement to our mean time to repair. So that's how quickly we repair someone who's out of service. So it does appear that the rehab program is paying off. And we've also experienced a 15% decrease year over year in the out of service. So those connections, or those customers who experience the service outage has decreased 15% year over year.
So go ahead.
Certainly that's made an impact on it. I will tell you, we have experienced, as was mentioned in an earlier presentation, we certainly have experienced some labor issues. As you can imagine, there are broadband grants going on nationally, and that's impacting, I believe that's playing a large role in some of the labor issues. We are targeting an additional 10 technicians, that's a lot to say, from what we've had in the past. I will tell you this, Brightspeed is also currently hiring customer service representatives to staff multiple call centers, is my understanding. So I know Lumen has taken an approach to encourage more online reporting of trouble tickets and ordering. And some of our customers have found it challenging to reach us. I am excited to say that I'm aware that Brightspeed is staffing up call centers to take care of that workload as well. And again, we're targeting additional technicians in the state of Virginia. It's my understanding an additional 10 are targeted over what was had last year, and 2 of those 10 have been successfully staffed. But it is certainly a challenge. I can also tell you, in order to bring our repair intervals down to a level that is satisfactory, we have open Sundays and holidays to our technicians on a voluntary basis, is my understanding. And then all technicians are working. Everyone's trying to call me right now. All of our technicians are working 6 days a week and overtime to bring all of our intervals in the state of Virginia in line with expectations.
Thank you. So am I correct in assuming that the fiber overbuild will take over the copper? Is that the intention, is to eventually phase it out?
I expect that to take place.
But you guys are committed to maintaining the copper that's currently there?
So there will, I would assume that at some point there will come a day where there is no need to maintain 2 networks. Certainly, customers get a far better experience than a fiber optic network. And that is not something that is going to take place quickly or in the blink of an eye. And and when and if that situation comes that there is a desire to retire a copper network, certainly customers will be given ample notice. But, you know, as copper networks, or excuse me, as fiber networks are built out, customers tend to very quickly transition away from the copper and over to the fiber. It's just simply far more reliable, and for broadband purposes, it is immensely faster. It's a much, much better customer experience. But again, if and when that time does come, there will certainly be ample communications with customers to ensure that they're well aware of the transition. And again, typically is the case, customers quickly abandon the copper network themselves when fiber networks are available to them.
Thank you.
Mr. Brewer, this is Debbie Donahue, and I had several people in my district, Wakefield district, that have battled with CenturyLink being up and down. One of which was our previous chair, who is in ill health, and they are battling right now because T-Mobile seems to be having trouble in our area as well. So to get a trouble ticket in right now for people that don't have cell phones and CenturyLink isn't necessarily working well is difficult. And we've said this before, but I've been working with Terrence, and he has been very responsive, and I appreciate that. But I try to give him feedback on the customer service or the lack thereof, and I think it's probably more technology-based than anything. I use chat at this point, and I would recommend anybody put in a ticket through the chat process because you get a complete chat script at the end of it that you can share. And I've shared those with Terrence in the past when I've had trouble personally. And the frustration that I have for all of our citizens is if you have a problem and you submit a ticket, there seems to be a process within CenturyLink that basically says, sure, we've got your ticket, we've got you scheduled on this date and time, stay home from 8 to 5, somebody will be there. Now, I believe most technology companies in today's world, most companies now are narrowing the window down first of all. So far, I haven't seen that within CenturyLink, but the problem is we have people that sit at home, won't leave from 8 to 5, and then at 5 o'clock or 5:30, they get something that says, oh, your technician will be out on another day, or sorry, we couldn't get there, we'll come again. It's just not fair to the customer and to our citizens. And I try to give that kind of feedback to Terrence when I have something in print that I can do that. So I would highly recommend when you're transitioning between one product and another, I'm very concerned that it's only going to get worse because if you've got copper, you're going to go to a certain area in a call center, and I used to work in Capital One, so I understand how this works. You dial the number, you're going to go over here, but the people you really want to talk to are the landline people, not the fiber people, because you still got copper, and it's just going to get more difficult for our customers until fiber is here. And nobody has said to me that I know of that everyone that has CenturyLink landline is going to have fiber from CenturyLink or from Brightspeed.
And thank you for that. I understand your concerns insofar as the call center is. Certainly, I actually managed a call center a number of years ago with a different iteration of this provider, so I certainly understand your concerns there. I have not seen the call flow for the Brightspeed call center as we sit today, but I will be sure to pass your concerns along to them, and you indicated you've also gotten them with Terrence. But I do know that Lumen had made a decision to encourage customers to place trouble tickets, place orders as much as possible in the digital format. And certainly Brightspeed is going to have that option available as well. Brightspeed is also, like I mentioned earlier, staffing up call centers to adequately to be able to respond to customers' needs. So hopefully between the two, it is my expectation that we will deliver outstanding service. Again, I have the opportunity to meet with the Brightspeed executive leadership team on a routine basis, and I've been been very impressed with them and their experience. Insofar as the move to fiber, I don't have Brightspeed build plans for your county as of yet. I will say this though, with the additional BEAD money that is about to be made available to states from the federal government, I sat in on a number of meetings with NTIA to discuss it, and they've made it very clear that universal coverage for broadband services meeting the speed threshold of 100 by 20 are going to be required as a condition of your state receiving BEAD money. I'm not aware of any state that doesn't have plans to accept that funding. So ultimately, it is my belief that your communities will indeed be able to build a fiber, be it by Brightspeed or a number of other providers. Obviously, with all of the competitive grants going on in the world today, there's lots of providers interested in those grants, to include electric cooperatives, telephone cooperatives, other private providers, certainly, and Brightspeed has been very aggressive in grants that they've bid on this year, and it's my understanding they will continue to be aggressive in the future. So there's lots of, I believe that the federal BEAD budget is approximately $42 billion. I might be off a half a billion or so, but that's very close. Later this year, the federal government will disclose funding for each state, and that's based upon the number of connections that still need to be made in any given state. So the funding is going to differ across the states, but needless to say, in all states, it will be in several hundreds of millions of dollars to bring us to universal coverage as the goal. And I am told by members of the NTIA team there will be a requirement to get to universal coverage, and which means speeds of 100 by 20. And quite frankly, that's just, in most every case, that's going to be a fiber deployment.
Mr. Frazier, do you have anything? I've got one more thing.
Go ahead.
Okay. I would be remiss if I didn't speak for the Harris Hollow 8, I think it is, that Supervisor Whitson has spoken to Terrence on many occasions with regards to a group of people on a back road that loses their CenturyLink connectivity pretty much when it rains. Or I think when the wind blows heavily, or other things. But anyway, supposedly, I believe they were part of this new copper rehab. And they are still having the same problems when the weather blows or rains heavily. And we do have seniors back there that are not in good health. So anything you can do to...
And would you repeat that location for me again, please?
It's Harris Hollow.
So I guess to put a fine point on that, does Brightspeed have plans to identify routine trouble areas and make capital investment to eliminate those problems? We know that the fiber deployment, I suspect that the fiber deployment will follow the density where there's return on investment, and that's a capital decision that makes sense. That's not Rappahannock County in general. But we do have these areas with very aged copper that are struggling, and it seems like Band-Aid after Band-Aid. Even though you did the rehab project, we're still having problems.
Well, I will certainly, Terrence is a part of my team, and I will certainly have a conversation with him to get more details on the Harris Hollow area as you described. Keep in mind that, let's just say if, for example, the Brightspeed investment plan using its own dollars don't include an area, that does not exclude that area from broadband and grants. And as I've been instructed by the NTIA team, that there's a requirement in order for states to receive the money, the broadband plan that they have to submit to NTIA in order to get approval for the funding has to get everyone to universal service. So that in and of itself, one way or another, will meet or will require a build out. In most cases, fiber to upgrade all communities.
Well, and our community has a roadmap and a pathway towards universal fiber already with a different provider. But we still have the near-term issues of your copper infrastructure routinely failing, and what capital investment can we expect in those very critical areas? And Mr. Hinkson knows they happen all the time, and you've got the data. So how will you compile that data, review the data to make the investments that are necessary?
Well, I will ensure that Brightspeed's leadership team, who makes those investment decisions, has the total reports that have been provided to Terrence. And if you give me an opportunity, we'll take a look and get back to you on that particular issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Brewer. We do appreciate you being here. I don't know how often or if we have any idea of when we can see him again.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm grateful for you. This is Gary Curry, by the way. Grateful for you offering, and Terrence offering for you to be involved with us today.
Thank you, Terrence.
But
I'm sure he was excited to do that.
would reiterate, he is extremely responsive. He'll get an email at 1 a.m. He'll return it at 1:30. I don't know if he's a robot or human, but
Terrence is a tremendous asset to our team. I am very grateful to have him on my team, and I am also happy to report that Terrence will also be transitioning over to Brightspeed on October 3rd.
excellent. That was my last question. Is he still our go-to person?
He is, yes, sir.
Thank goodness.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank
Best
you.
of luck
Have a
with the
good day.
transition.
All right. Now we're on to public comment. Anyone in the courtroom wishing to speak, if you would please be recognized, come up to the mic, give us your name and the district you're in to be heard, I would appreciate it. Yes, ma'am.
I figured it was time, Sheila Gressinger, Hampton District. I figured it was time for some fun, so I brought a little block that has the A on it. So this is a visual, Mr. Frazier. This is a visual, okay? It's A. That's a very important point I want to bring across today is attitude. And I have this little thing on a bookcase in my house, and I look at it every once in a while, sort of as a reminder that I want to have a positive attitude. And so that's what I want to address today because we have so much going forward. We're doing a lot of work with our zoning and planning. And I at the last election cycle, I heard a lot of people saying, oh, we don't want this and you can't do this. And I would prefer to have people go forward with a different attitude. How can we address the changes that have occurred over the years and decide how we can work together to make things happen well? I do think in the discussions of the building committee, there have been a lot of meetings and people have showing the renderings and preparing for conversations, and I think that's a real plus. And I'm hoping we can continue to do that in all the other various things that are being addressed. Zoning is very complicated. I think our comprehensive plan has done us very well with all the various proposals and guidance that it's given us over the years, and so I would hope that we go forward with a positive attitude. Where is it? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila.
Yes, sir.
Gary H. Hampton.
Today I'm speaking to you as one of your appointed representatives to the CSB. You get to hear Jim once a year. There's a lot going on. I think he did a good job of summarizing it, so I won't repeat any of that. But just a couple things. The development at the collaboration with CCLC has brought, really for the first time that I'm aware of, a regular presence of CSB staff, RRCS staff, to Rappahannock County, which goes beyond what they're actually doing with the children and the parents there, because it means there's a physical person there now in the county who then can direct other people to other resources. So that's a plus. We're working really hard to try and upgrade the senior center, whether it stays in Scrabble or whether it moves somewhere else. But one of the things that this might allow us to do is, if there's going to be a relocation of the senior center from Scrabble School, and Scrabble School, some of you know, maybe you all know, it may be under consideration for a Federal Park Service program, which then would mean that we would not be able to continue to probably do our program there. We don't know how that will turn out. It's the federal government, who knows. But if there's an opportunity for it to become a pathway national center for African American history on the way to the park, that would be a great thing for our community and for the nation. So we don't know how that will turn out. But that has caused the CSB, and as one of your representatives from Rappahannock, we've been sort of at the table. What could we do to make it a win-win? And if there's another physical location in our community that would be more centrally located, that might involve more square footage, that would allow the CSB to put the senior center there, we then could consider other services moving permanently, physically to Rappahannock. And the top on our list is a satellite C center. The last thing I want to bring to your attention is we have been struggling for years on how we get people from our county to the core of services, which is really Culpeper. And we all know our county. It's hard to get someone who needs services in a car with a stranger to go to someplace they don't want to go, to get wait and have someone take a lot of information. It's like any time you've been admitted to any program. If we can find a low threshold, we can probably serve many more of the needs of the people in Rappahannock. I'm encouraged because for the first time that I'm aware of, we have peers who are willing to come to Rappahannock, take one of their peer people and take them to the C Center. They'll go there. It's called the Coffee and the Donut Hook. You go because there's people there you want to talk to, friends. You create community. It's better than sitting home alone. And if they're already connected with a program like AA, and one of their mentors, one of their folks says, hey, it's not our regular meeting, but come with me. I'm going to this place in Culpeper. They're good people. We've seen some of our folks who need to have friends, to need help, find it there. So some of that 10,000, which is really astronomical in my mind, it's almost as large as the sum total of everything else this organization does with its 88 programs. One new idea has opened the door to so many needy people in our 5 counties. But because some of our folks, it's working for them already, I'm convinced that if we can get a satellite here, we will see more of our folks access it. It lowers stigma and makes it doable. It's not a whole day deal. And it's very promising. So that's sort of your local update on things that are, in this past year, have been happening through RRCS that are directly affecting Rappahannock citizens. Finally, I want to thank you for your support. We are a tiny county. We have the fewest number of people in the 5-county region that are served by this mammoth organization. And yet we do our fair share to help support the work, not just for us. I mean, yes, I want everybody in Rappahannock to get as full service as possible. I'm your advocate for those resources to be available to people that live in our county. On the other hand, you can feel very good about the work you're doing for probably 20,000 people each year. And so whatever our dollar contribution is, somebody is definitely benefiting because those are dollars you're putting into that effort. So on behalf of the RRCS, all of our employees, and the work we do and all the clients we serve, thank you for your continued support.
Thank you.
Can you take a question?
If that's appropriate. Sure.
Sure.
He gave a presentation, why wouldn't I have a question?
That was public comment, but go for it.
Sure.
But he didn't do it as a public comment, he did it as a representative of this board.
Go ahead, Mr. Free.
You mentioned something about the Scrabble school being chosen for some pathway designation.
Because it's, help me with the name of the guy. Rosenwald Schools, right, thank you. They're built all over the country. Well, an act of Congress authorize the National Park Service to look at all of them and see if there are places where it would be appropriate for the federal government to create essentially a tourist center and use one of those schools. I think 11 or 12 have been designated so far. Scrabble School did not make the initial list, but people who are well aware what this project would do think it's foolish with the Shenandoah Park right here. Why wasn't on the list? So there's an effort being made by any number of folks who have interest in African American history and that particular building and the park and everything else. Given the thousands of people that come through here on their way to the park, why not make that one of those schools that's maintained as a historic site?
Could I ask a question? Why wouldn't they contact the Board of Supervisors about that? Because I don't remember that being done.
I have no idea whether you've been contacted or not.
No.
So if that hasn't happened, I might be able to find a name that I could give Mr. Curry that he could follow up. But it came to us because we are a current, I don't know if we're a tenant, but we're certainly a user.
The county owns it. You're the
Sure.
tenant, so they should have went to the owners.
Well, what they wanted to know was what was the nature of the activity in the building currently. And I guess they came to us because, as far as I know, we have the most activity in the building currently. Certainly, it has nothing to do with us owning it. We're using it. But in the application, somebody who wants them to reconsider and add Scrabble School.
So who applied?
I have no idea, sir. That one I don't know. All I know is it came to us that if they got recognition and if they were added, and again, if they were chosen, that's a lot of ifs, would we be able to find another site in Rappahannock for the senior center? That's how it came to us to consider.
But you didn't contact the Board of Supervisors to see if we were even aware of this?
At this point, that would in
I
some ways be
assume
premature.
it's, the folks who run the museum at the center are looking into this, but I don't know. We can reach out to them and find out.
They don't have a right to.
I suppose they can look into anything, but the
They don't have the right
board
to
owns it,
encumber a
so-
property that's not owned by them.
Right, and obviously they can't convey any interest in that property, only the board.
I think this was a preliminary to see if they'd even be eligible. Because as I understand it, one of the things that kicks you out of consideration is if you're fully used for some other purpose. What they want to do is conserve buildings that might be at risk.
I understand that, but my problem with the whole concept here is they were not the proper authority to be discussing it.
I don't disagree with you. I agree with you. I assumed that somewhere you'd been in that loop. But
Well, because we're the Board of Acquiescence, time and time again. We're the last ones to know about something that we're supposed to be in charge of.
I'll do my best to get information, Mr. Curry.
You didn't get that information to us. You just said you didn't get that information to us. I just found out today because you mentioned it by accident.
Well, it wasn't really an accident, but it had nothing to do with anything we have any control over. We were asked a question, what was our current use of the facility? And would it be possible for us to relocate our activity if that site became unavailable?
But you didn't think that was worthy of talking to the property owners?
In hindsight, it was probably an oversight, but at the time, we were asked a very specific question about one of our programs, and we answered it.
Right, but that included you removing your facility from that facility to some other facility that you didn't have. So, I mean, in retrospect, if I was in your position, I think I would have contacted the building owner, which was the board, or their representative, Mr. Curry, and say, hey, what's up?
My only defense is I assumed, thinking like you do, that if I was the other person running this process, the first person I would have talked to would have been Mr. Curry. Not being that person, but being a person I was just a member of a board that received a question, and being a Rappahannock rep, I was included in that conversation. But I was not in any way a moving party with any responsibility for any of these decisions. I was asked a question. So I don't disagree with you, and I will do my best to see that Mr. Curry is included in that loop.
As a member of this board, I would appreciate that if you could keep us apprised of anything that
Well,
develops.
I will put him in the loop, and then I'll pick myself out because it's not really a loop that I'm in, but I'm feeling the loop. So, but yeah, I understand and appreciate your concern. I assumed incorrectly that you guys had been contacted about this.
We hadn't.
All right.
But
Thanks for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you, Gary.
Anyone else for public comment? And I'll move to Zoom if nobody in the courtroom. All right, Anyone on Zoom wishing to speak during public comment, if you'll raise your Zoom hand, we'll be recognizing you. Not seeing any Zoom hands raised, I'll close public comment. Thank you. All right, we're at the consent agenda for the board.
Can you pull out the supplemental appropriations? If we could pull that out, I would make a motion to approve the items 1, 2, and 4 in the consent agenda.
Sounds good. We have a motion pulling number 3, the supplemental appropriations.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Ms. Smith?
Gary, could you just walk us through the supplemental appropriations, please?
Sure,
Since there are so
it's a
many?
long list.
Yes,
and,
sir.
This is largely due to our end-of-year projects.
Correct.
That are carried forward to this year. The first is not that. The first is insurance recovery due to a tree falling on a fence at Stewart Field. That facility is insured by the county, and so we received that money, and there's also a check being cut to RAA, who already paid the bills for the fence in this check, the accounts payable you just approved. Unspent funds at the end of the general fund, at the end of the fiscal year for courthouse security, which are collected by certain court fees, that e-summons and concealed weapons, those are all secured separately. We track the revenue. What doesn't get spent, we move forward. Sheriff and I have been talking about investing those courthouse security dollars in CCTV. The board might also think to dialogue with the sheriff on some of those funds, which are growing quickly towards your courthouse discussions, studies and whatnot. Concealed weapons similar, e-summons similar. And that was a new fee that the board put in place last year to help support the sheriff's MDT program.
That was the e-summons?
Yes. And it's just, I think it's a $5 fee versus a $20 fee. The library, the amount assumed in the adopted budget that we would receive from the state for the library was, I think, only $65,000. Turns out they're providing $74,000. There was a significant increase this year that was discussed during budget development for the library. 75% of all funds that we get from the state must be programmed to books and subscriptions. So therefore, there's an additional appropriation to the library books and subscriptions of $68.72, but that balance of 25% is reducing the local transfer to the library fund.
You said 68,000.
6,800, sorry. Library received a very generous donation from the Friends of the Library. The budget assumed it would be 8,000. It was actually 9,100. So we're just adding that extra money that wasn't anticipated as revenue. The board appropriated $150,000 at the last fiscal year for EMS transition costs to bring up the new department. A lot of the equipment is still not in, and we're still in a long lead time for things like the Life Pack, which we have a loaner from the company, but our equipment is not here yet, and we haven't paid them. And so we need to make sure we have money in this fiscal year to make that payment. So this is the balance of what wasn't spent from that last year. Where am I? BJCCCA is the state grant for juvenile justice. We receive about $9,600 every year. What we don't use, we need to pay back to the state in the next year. And so last year was a very small expenditure year. They claim it was an outlier. So in order to pay the state back $6,900, we need to get that into the budget. Otherwise, we'll short ourselves the budget for this year. Sheriff had an insurance recovery for a vehicle that's placed into their auto maintenance line. The MDT program that I mentioned from the e-summons fund, that project has not kicked off. Sheriff's been working through several purchase options. The company she originally worked with is folded into a new company. The $103,000 was the original amount appropriated by the board last year. That was leveraged, if you look at the detailed form, by the Public Safety Payroll CARES Act money, which was $380,000. The board appropriated $103,000. This is requesting that $103,000 be appropriated with an additional $47,000 to get that budget to $150,000. Victim witness grant revenue true up, that was an 18-month grant. We went through 6 months last fiscal year, and we made some estimates on how much would be spent in 22 versus 23, and we just need to clean up that math for this fiscal year. And you can see that the budget for this fiscal year need to be reduced in office supplies by $515 and increased in furniture and equipment by $2,000 to balance out what we will actually receive from that grant this year based on what we requested last year. Sorry.
No apology necessary. If anybody has any questions, I would make a motion then that we approve the supplemental appropriations, and thank you, Gary, for walking us through those.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Moving into appointments. This one caught my eye because of the renewed until 2028.
Yeah, your policy suggests that I make you aware of vacancies, and this vacancy has been on the books for several months now. When I went looking with Ms. Summers on when the next Ag and Forestal District ordinance would be due for review, it's 2028. So I would suggest you not make an appointment to this committee now, and that we drop this off the agenda until maybe 2027.
I make a motion that we do that.
Yeah, but if we do that, then this person will be cut out of about 5 years of experience.
We have a motion. Do I have a second?
A second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So how are you going to make yourself a note on that one? Calendar reminder in 2025.
Well, we have our database that reminds us. I'll have to add something to that. Where am I? CPMT, some of you have had the opportunity to serve on this body. Supervisor Smith serves on it now. It's made of several different representatives from several different agencies. By state code, those agencies need to be represented. But it's important for the local body to make appointments because there's some immunity that comes along with that appointment. Here, the Juvenile Court Service rep was Ira Holland. He's asking you to consider appointing one of his staff people, Mary Pitts. She has been attending. Mr. Holland has had a conflict, but she's been attending but can't vote. And similarly, I'm asking for you to appoint Miss Bonnie Jewell effective October 1 to serve in my place, and I've been serving on this as a local. That's actually an optional position, but I think it's useful for local government to have this seat taken. And so October 1st, because she did ask for like 2 days off between now and I think the next several months, and this is one of them, the next meeting. So I'll continue to serve for that next meeting, and then we'll go forward from there. So my request is for the board to reappoint the full slate so that it's clear in the record of who the current appointees are.
Serving on this body, I would just then make the motion that we appoint Mary Pitts in the Juvenile Court Services Unit representative position, which is a change, and to add Bonnie L. Jewell as our local government official instead of Mr. Curry, effective October 1st, and keep the rest of the slate as it previously was and as included in today's agenda.
Would you still remain as an alternate in case something was to arise in the future?
It may not be a bad idea. I don't see why you couldn't do that.
With all due respects, I mean, sometimes we do have to have a day off, have to go somewhere, have to do something.
Or another meeting.
or another meeting. I just thought while we're there, if that would be something we could amend the motion to.
I can certainly amend my motion to include Mr. Curry as an alternate to Bonnie Jewell for the local government official position.
The motion, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second, any other discussion? He didn't waste any time, did he?
Not even an employee.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Flies.
Thank you.
Social Services Board.
You have a term, Ms. Payne's term on the Social Services Board is expiring in November 5th. She has indicated she's declining reappointment. This is not one of those bodies by policy that I'm compelled to advertise before talking to the board. I'm not sure how the board wants to reach out and find somebody interested. Happy to place a newspaper vacancy notice, or perhaps you want to reach out to your communities to see if you know somebody who's interested.
But when we had to make an appointment, and we had 2 applicants, Ms. Burleson was appointed, we had another one at that time, I don't know if she would still be interested.
I can certainly check on that. I think the last 2 or 3 times we've made appointments, there's been several folks interested, so we certainly
Yeah,
could
this
research
body
that
recently
pool.
grew from 3 to 5 members,
what I
and
was thinking.
when you grew to 5, I think you've swallowed up some of those other interested
Oh,
members,
okay.
but there may be still more interested people out there who wouldn't be interested in the Social Services Board.
Commissioner Parrish is in the room.
Would you be interested?
Careful what meeting you come to.
Be interested?
I'll check.
So, appointment would take place in October or November, really, to avoid a gap in service. So, could place a vacancy notice in October if the board wants to work on this for a month, and then if you encourage somebody to apply, I'll have an application before you at your next meeting. If there are no applications, perhaps then you'll want to put something in the newspaper.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Yeah. Motion, are you good?
All right. Alternate Board of Supervisor member representing the Planning Commission.
There's a suggestion that with Mr. Whitson being absent from board meetings and planning commission meetings, it might be appropriate for the board to appoint an alternate member of the board as a representative on to that body. Mr. Goff and I have looked through state code. We don't see any reason why this would be out of order or not appropriate. So if the board would like to identify an alternate, I think you can do that.
Planning Commission's got quite a bit of work to do.
Yes, they do. And I understand they're working to set a work session for next Wednesday. That notice will probably be sent out tomorrow. It'd be your first obligation.
I would be happy to do it if you all wanted to have me do it. I know that I have a number of appointments, but I would enjoy it for sure, and there's a lot of work going forward, and I think it is a good idea to have one of us there. Yeah, if you guys would like me to be there, I'd be happy to do it.
I'd make that motion.
I'll second.
I was thinking,
I don't think you can.
with the amount of work
Sure.
that we needed, maybe somebody that already been on there. Were you interested in, Ms. Smith?
I mean, I would be happy to serve if folks want me to serve. I do think it's important that it be someone with some experience. And I don't mean that, in any way personally
Right.
toward you, Mr. Carney, but with the amount of work that is moving forward, I just think someone who's had experience studying a work session schedule and moving that sort of document toward conclusion is important. And I could do it. I would support someone else that wanted to do it, but to me, vital part of the recipe is experience. And that sort of narrows the field for me.
Ms. Smith, Ms. Summers and I discussed today that we didn't think, and I imagine it's subject to interpretation, we didn't think that the alternate would be seated as the chair.
Correct.
And the vice chair, Mr. Light, would continue to be the chair.
Correct.
So make sure you understand, that's our understanding.
No, I totally understood that before you mentioned it.
Yeah.
I didn't ever think that was part of the description. But I do think it being the voice of the board on the planning commission, whether you're the chair or not, you have to drive the work and you have to drive the vision of the board and provide a clear communication between the board of supervisors and the planning commission. It's challenging.
I mean, I served for many, many years, but right now I have too many commitments in the evening, so I wasn't even gonna volunteer unless you paid me.
We do. I think it's $35 per meeting.
That-
Yes.
I hate to lose that much money, but
Ms. Smith, I remember you nominating me at the beginning of the year, and I thought that, given my position voting here on the board, that it would benefit me being on there. But I think that I agree with you in a sense that, you know, we have a lot of work ahead of us to get it done. So I'd be happy to nominate you and to make a motion to put you on.
You got a,
Well, we have to vote
you
on
got a motion on the table.
So,
Either
did anybody
needs-
second this one?
You did.
I did.
You can withdraw your second.
I'll withdraw.
Okay.
Then I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay.
The domino effect.
There's no longer a motion on the table.
Now I'll make a motion to nominate Ms. Smith to be the alternate BOS member a representative on the planning commission.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
And I would just say that I appreciate you all nominating me and putting me through. And I certainly look forward to the day where Mr. Whitson is well enough to rejoin us and take his place back on the planning commission.
Here, here.
And look at your schedule for next Wednesday.
Yes, sir. I'll clear the decks.
All right, moving into old business, water resource. We haven't heard anything.
Unfortunately, no. I do have an updated sketch that Mr. White provided, which really doesn't show much else, but wow, it must be a large file, or our network is bad. But he's still waiting for the AG's office to provide support on access easement. The board indicated your general willingness to entertain an access easement. So now we're just waiting for the state to do state
Stuff.
things and bring opportunity to you to potentially consider executing that easement and allowing this climate response network well to be placed next to your radio tower.
Sounds good.
Absolutely. Classification and compensation study update.
During your budget deliberations, there was pretty frank conversation. The board wanted this project done by now. It's not done. And it's a staff capacity issue. It was my hope to have assistant on July 1, and staff capacity delayed that whole process. As you're well aware and as introduced today, we'll have Ms. Jewell starting on the 12th. She and I have already discussed that this project is her #1 priority. And fortunately, I can also say that we've received acceptance of our offer for the HR generalist position.
Great.
Fantastic.
Which will be seated October 1. And Ms. May remains on the payroll as required to help with the transition of the day-to-day flywheel, month-to-month flywheel type payroll, all those other things that have to happen onboard, off-board to get the new HR generalist trained up and transition off to the others. So The goal I'm expressing here is that between now and payroll processes for January 1, that we will bring to you drafts and documents necessary, hopefully, for you to make a decision in December on a package so that things could be in place for the second half of this fiscal year, starting in January, as well as the discussion the board had earlier this year about potentially revisiting bonuses as part of the program that would maybe be most appropriate, as bonuses often are in December before the holidays. So that's all I can offer to you, other than saying it was my fervent goal to be further along, but I am not, but help is here.
What's our new deadline?
So, as expressed here in the narrative, is to bring to you documents in October and November with the intent for action by the board in December.
Okay.
Okay,
Excellent.
thank you.
And I think that rolls nicely
Quite well.
into, Ms. Smith had asked I think Ms. Donahue asked the board members to consider priorities, and Ms. Smith suggested using the tool that I had shared with the board previously on various tasks that are active. I've attached, actually as updated this morning, a chart. I left the old one on there because I know that some of you might have already looked at that version. And I don't know how the board wants to proceed, but there's a lot of items on the list, and happy to assist, answer questions.
One of the requests that I had in the email was really trying to find on the larger projects who is taking the lead role, and if it's you, do you have support now that we've hired people? So I don't know if there's a way to go through.
Some of these are obvious, some might depend on the board's wishes relative to priority. If the different pool of projects that are current priority will weigh on how the work is allocated. Does that make sense?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I don't mean
Yeah.
to sound that way.
So just, if there are 10 projects, the allocation of who does what might depend on which 10 projects are up first, up second, up third, where I would have to divide the pool up different ways depending on which ones, if there are certain groups that we want to hit all up front and they are all HR sort of things, then Ms. Jewell and I are going to split them up. Or tag team them or whatever. But if there's a handful that are landfill projects versus an HR project, then I'm probably going to do the landfill project and she's going to do the HR project.
Sounds good.
So I thought about printing this for you, but I did not, and I apologize. Right now, the list, I've tagged this status as active, pending, and complete. And the way this database is stored on my end, I can sort and hide and do all sorts of things. But right now, it's just sorted by the number, which has no bearing other than that's the number they were put into the list.
Okay, so it's not a prioritization.
Not a priority at all. And you can see there's a subcategory for some, whereas you see RCHS shelter generator has several sub-items that have to happen in order. The invitation for bid for that just went out last Friday, and so that's sitting waiting for bids. Our generator's ready to be delivered, but the switchgear isn't going to be here till November. So I'm kind of just in time to get the contractor to get the pad and everything ready so it all comes together.
If a data center doesn't get in front of you.
Well, it's been a year, so I would think it's our turn.
We're finding that out on bigger projects.
Our county vehicle that we ordered last October is supposed to be coming in any time now too.
I don't think data centers use that many vehicles.
Yeah, well, it's only a 2,000 amp transfer switch, so a data center
No,
is small
honestly,
potatoes.
We're hamstrung government at every level is hamstrung. We have to go through a process to, and I'm digressing here, but we have to go through a process to see if we need something. We determine we need something. We have to allocate the money for it. We go after it. And then we even get a confirmation that we can buy it for that amount of money. And a data center comes in and they say, how much do I have to pay to be at the front of the line?
Yeah.
And guess where we wind up?
Well, the state recognized some of that and gave everybody an automatic year extension on those grants that we received for this high school generator.
Private business can certainly operate around the roadblocks.
So is there anything that the board was expecting to see on this list that is missing?
And that one of the things I said it was updated because things come up and I think of them like, oh, that should be on the list, or, oh, this was due, and I took a win and put it on the list and marked it complete because we just did it.
I'd really like to see some sort of prioritization because, you know, the speed limit signs.
So my priority is simply active or pending, so it's in one of two batches. And so then if those two categories are not applied in a way that meets the consensus of the board, then that's easy direction to me to change focus in areas where maybe there isn't a regulatory requirement or something like that. If you want to have more granular prioritization, we can try to do that as well.
I would say the one thing that I expected to see on this list that I don't see, and maybe I just didn't see it, is our discussion about improvements that are needed in the building and zoning office and that deliverable.
Yeah, I didn't view that as a project, but
Would that be under, I just had it on the other one and I just switched to the most updated one. You had something in here for personnel policy.
so we have, yeah.
Is that just the handbook?
Yeah. So in a broader context, one of the benefits of having additional staff capacity was that after we kind of get through a normalization period, I'll be able to pull further away from the finance and HR items, and Ms. May did all the HR stuff, so really the finance stuff, but and then focus more on the land use areas. That is, what's on here is all the land use type ordinances, all 23, all these sub things, but what's not on there is process and procedure for the departments. Which could be 23.8, 9.
Well, I mean, I kind of looked at what we were expecting to get as a board when I thought about, trying to get some things done this year. The pay scale we expected to receive this month, and now I guess it'll be October and November for conclusion in December. For October, I believe when we came out of our joint meeting, we talked about having an outline for an approach of the ordinance work to the board by October, so that we could get going with the Berkeley group by January. So that is an action item I would expect to be on the front burner, so that we can move that to a successful conclusion.
And I have talked to them about preparing a scope to do the first step of that.
Okay. And then I would say, hand in glove with that, to my mind, I think this board is of a mind to redefine the role of the BZA, and I would think that is a top priority for me as well.
That's 23.7, which I have shown as active.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying if all this other ordinance work is going on, that BZA discussion is a big priority for me, especially I think with all the things we've seen materializing on there lately. I think that's important. November, I'd like some kind of feedback too on the building and zoning improvements that we discussed earlier this year. and what the plan is to move forward with that. And then it sounds like you'd already anticipated some conclusions or decisions being reached in December. The other piece of the puzzles, for me, some of the traffic calming, in terms of the speed displays in Sperryville, I think we've missed a window of opportunity for this tourist year. But if we could get something aligned for next spring, that would be nice.
That's 10.
Along with the speed limit, possible increasing the fines for those.
$200 fine.
Yes. And then the other thing I think is a priority by next budget cycle, which we all agreed on at the time, if I remember correctly, is the structure of the tax credits for seniors. And we have not had another discussion about that, and I don't want that to get lost.
That's on
There's grams on that, but
Well, that's,
that says it's
Kind
under
of
I
development.
thought we had kind of left that as a discussion between the county
That's
attorney and
36.
Mr. Curry and Mary as to how to,
Yeah.
Mary Graham as to how to structure that. But that'll be here before we all know it.
And that's not meant to include 36, the late fees for personal property, correct? How she made the presentation
No.
about doing both those things.
No.
Is that on the list? by the
No.
way? Okay.
If you want that on the list. I didn't gather that was. That might be something we want to explore at some point in time. There will have to be revenue replacement or just lose revenue.
Just her suggestion of getting rid of it.
Yeah,
Yeah, gotcha. Yep.
My last community didn't use that process. I think it's awkward, but that's what we use.
the historic building work, I just think people are probably interested in what we're doing with the buildings that are going to stay. And if we have any idea when people will actually see things happening.
So that's a great question. We've been struggling with the building committee on how best to procure that. We had a great talk at the last meeting, but I haven't talked to that gentleman since then, who came in, and maybe tonight that you can talk to the building committee as a body about how to, borrow a word from yesterday, excite that discussion.
Well, procurement continues to be a challenge, and how we move forward and make sure we're entering a relationship with someone to do the work that will not only do a good job, but provide a good value.
Yeah. We want best price, but only by capable, competent people, which when you're dealing with historic masonry and buildings is complicated. I think there's
Low bid is going to be the worst possible thing we can do.
So I don't know the best way to draw consensus out of some of this.
I think it's good to understand that basically anything that's active or pending is on your daily,
Anything that's pending
Something's
is on
happening.
the back burner,
okay.
to put it in any other terms, and active is on the front burner. And so Ms. Smith brought up the speed display signs. Those are listed pending as opposed to active. And many things I just can't delay because there's a regulatory implication or something like that. But other things are optional, and so we literally can delay certain things in favor of other things.
So, item number 40, the EMS billing agreement with resolution, is that the agenda item for today?
Yes.
Okay, so I have a question. It's listed as active, and the speed display signs are listed as pending. That particular item, number 40, was never heard or voted on by this board.
Right, and so
And yet, it is a higher priority than an item that has had a 5-0 vote by this board to pursue.
and a lot of that is to do with the fact that this is a 2-hour exercise versus a protracted process with VDOT, which just takes a lot of effort, and one that I only had to take a small role in for development as opposed to the main role. That's the difference.
2-hour exercise.
For me,
You've got more than 2 hours in it, don't you?
Probably not.
You said last night that you had several versions of it between March.
Yeah, but that's, Mr. Polster drafting up, me seeing it, reviewing it, editing it, kicking it back, and sitting down with Mr. Goff, for like 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So my personal role has been relatively limited in the development because I've been able to lever staff.
And that was the other part of this that I wanted to kind of see where you are going to be able to lever the staff once everybody gets, so that we can, I mean, to me, this looks like a lot for your shoulders, but now that we've approved and hired people, I'd like to see how it's going to fan out.
Right. Like number 33 is, that's been ticking away for a year and a half, and now the deadline is coming up. I'm going to have to do that, or we're just going to give up the 30 grand that ARPA is going to hand to us for tourism. But we have to have a plan to implement.
Can we use it for speed signs?
I don't think that probably counts, but
$30,000 for a tourism initiative? Can we give it to the park?
Can we use it for?
You could put up a few signs that say tourists.
we need to
welcome.
develop a plan, and there are a lot of constraints, and we can look into that.
Well, the park needs new playground equipment and it needs to
Yeah.
have the basketball courts resurfaced.
Yeah, now there's another opportunity there, which I don't know if I've made it to the last item, and that is the Commissioner of Revenue recently got notification of Code of Virginia change for the Forest Sustainability Fund, which there is state funding available that will be divvied up to counties across the state who have forest land use based on some metrics that are not revealed yet. And we just have to ask for it, although it won't be that easy. So the Commissioner of Revenue is working on the data so that we can bring that to you in October, November. That has to be used for outdoor recreation. So that is a great opportunity for the rec authority. And we have a lot of forestry use and
Yeah.
land use.
So, do you have just a gut reaction on terms of timeline, like for the speed?
Ms. Smith and I did meet with Sheriff Compton, so we.
Yeah, I mean, if you want them done by next spring, you say, I want it done by next spring.
Well, I was
And
just
then,
wondering.
and it could be, and hopefully it's not an issue like we've had with some others where those time-sensitive and critical things get in the way. But right now, I'm assuming that it's not as important as some of these other tasks, like the SESUP discussion, which now I see is on here. This is the temp signs that we've talked about at this board. You want to put signs at locations where
But
it's
we
not a
used to
big
do it.
ask.
If we used to do it, I don't understand why it stopped.
You don't.
I'm sorry.
You don't understand why it stopped? Because we went from John McCarthy to
We were
Gary
doing it under
Curry.
Debbie Kaiser.
That information is gone. And
But-
didn't make it through,
Did add it.
didn't make it through the void. So I had no knowledge of that ever happening.
Well, but the office over there did. They knew that they were doing
I
it.
had no idea.
I mean, I have a problem. That might
Well, the
be
zoning
wrong.
administrator came on after Ms. Kaiser was gone. So I don't know what zoning administrator was in place when that was happening. I guess it was Debbie herself.
No, they had hired,
Dave Dameron.
Dave Dameron. And
Who's
then
gone.
Brenda was here, but all of this stuff should have continued. I mean, we shouldn't have to hold a professional's job, a person's hand, when they know that they're doing something, and just because their boss changes, they say, well, I don't have to do that anymore.
Well, the zoning administrator has not been consistent. Ms. Summers did not come into an office. She had, I think, 1 day overlap with Mr. Dameron. You're presuming that Mr. Dameron had an overlap with Ms. Kaiser, which she didn't.
Well, one of the other individuals in the office was putting the signs up on his rounds.
Well, I have no idea. And that we
And
can
Ricky-
ask that
Rick-
individual.
Ricky Jenkins and Jack Atkins both put the signs up on their rounds.
First I've ever heard of that, right now.
Well, I'm telling you, and that's the truth.
Oh, good.
They used to put the signs up, and then all of a sudden, nobody puts the signs up anymore?
Do we have signs?
We did.
I have no idea.
I don't have them at my house.
So, it certainly sounds like it's easy to turn it back on if we happen to have signs. But I don't know anything about the program.
They
here
had the
that ever-
signs, and I imagine they had them between one of those two buildings over there. And why they're not going up is,
What did they say?
it just said the,
Pending,
planning commission meeting or whatever, I don't know exactly how it was worded, but it was a sign. One time I drove by and I complained that they wasn't up, and Debbie emailed back, well, yes, they are up. And I went and looked, I drove over there and I physically looked, and somebody had put the sign parallel with 211.
So
Good.
I think the signs are a great idea. My last community used the signs. I'm happy to use them here. It's just another thing to run down. So,
But they're going out and about anyway, the building official is going
I
out.
agree.
could you task somebody in the building office to do that?
well, it's
So
not a building
on
office
your
thing, it's a zoning thing, but, I mean,
They were doing that. And then they just quit.
if you say so. I mean, I wasn't here.
Well, but I know that they did it.
Okay.
I even-
We just gotta find the
I
sign.
literally complained about one that wasn't there,
Yeah.
and they texted me back and said, yes, it is there, or emailed me, maybe I didn't have text then. And I drove up there physically because I need to verify that what they're telling me is true, because I didn't see it, and the reason I didn't see it is because it's not 90 degrees to the road,
Yeah.
it's parallel with the
Your
road.
experience is valuable to me today, and I am unaware that there was ever a sign program here, and apparently there was. And so we will work to reinstitute the sign
Yeah,
program.
I think the signs, they need to find
And
those
that's number
signs.
42.
Well, and, I mean, was it like a something that was printed out and then they hand wrote it?
I think it was an 18 by 24 sign, and they could use a magic marker to put the specifics on there, like
So I think
March 22nd or April 13th.
the nature of the conversation shows you that any one of these has got this tale that might roll into the history. It's not always very simple. Maybe it is simple.
Well, if somebody, I mean, really, it's not that difficult to ask me a couple of questions, but nobody seems to want to talk to me. I just find out today that we've got a group that's trying to give away a piece of our property to the federal government.
A group can try to give away anything they want, but giving an interest in the real property
And the
is
group
only
that's
gonna
using
reveal-
it, the group that's using it doesn't seem to trigger in their mind that they may not be able to stay there if this happens.
That's not on the list. I can promise you that.
Yeah, add that to the list, please.
Yeah.
Right.
To the list. Don't give away free property.
Right.
That should be-
Sorry, that's not very helpful.
I mean,
Well, I do want to ask quickly, if you don't, Mr. Frazier, go ahead, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'll just, things like this kind of bother me because, I mean, if you used to do it, just because somebody changes up the trail a little bit, doesn't mean that y'all get to quit doing what you were doing.
So I agree that in the building office, the office manager, or whatever that position is called, and the erosion control officer are there, and we're there before. The building official, the zoning administrator, and myself were not here when any signs were being used. So if the other individuals knew that signs were used and there was conversations about that, I'm not aware of them. But we can work on that. If that is the most important thing, we will do it tomorrow.
Well, I don't think it has to be the most important thing, but it's also certainly not the most complicated thing. And I don't see why those people in that office can't talk to each other and bring us a template to approve for content for a very
Well,
simple
Well, I don't
sign.
think the
They just
board
need
needs
to
to
start doing it
I don't think
again
the board needs to be
tomorrow.
involved in the template, but we need to.
They can start doing it again tomorrow if they have the signs that they didn't.
There are a
get rid
number
the
of
sign.
things that are easy to do, that don't take a lot of time, that just have to be, there are a lot of other things that are taking attention at the same time, so.
And it looks like you've got other signs as well with the fireworks, temporary sign and stuff like that, so you can ball it all
Gotta do
together.
that too, yep.
That's something you may have to buy or have printed up or agree to whatever it is that you need to have there. But these other signs should have been existing.
And they might
should be
exist
behind
there.
a door somewhere in that building.
It's possible.
That's one good thing about technology today, you can keep track of things better as long as somebody's putting it in the system as to where it was and versus handwritten notes.
No idea.
Yeah.
Ms. Summers, in the past, has prepared a draft of a new sign for me. That suggests to me that she has no knowledge of the old sign, but we can do a deeper dive into that space.
I'd just like to see a draft of the proposed new sign so we could approve it.
Well, I don't think the
Punch holes
board,
in it.
I don't think the board needs to be involved. I mean,
Okay, well then let's do it
I
tomorrow.
mean, you don't need to approve, unless you want to approve the language of the sign. It's-
No, I just want to see a sign so that
Okay.
people don't, you know, I still run into people, and no offense, but I still run into people that when I start talking to them about something, they look at me with a blank expression. I said, well, it was in the newspaper, and they said, I don't read the newspaper.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's such a bad thing to read the
So it
newspaper.
sounds like
A lot of
Mr.
people don't have
Fraser and
time to read the
Smith think
newspaper.
number 42 is very important, and if you can hear it from the other board members, we will make sure it is very important.
I think it's very important, and if we need a vote on that or a consensus, but I think it needs to be, I mean, it's something that can happen real fast because those signs used to exist. Why are they- why
Who
are
put
they not
them up
there?
when things occurred? There was zoning building, who actually went around and put the signs up? You said Jack?
Well, I know Jack did, and I think Ricky Jenkins did, but I mean, the building official is going around anyway, the inspector, so either Jack or him, but he was hired when Brenda was here, the building official, but Jack has been here through all that, and so is Marlena.
I agree. That's what I said earlier.
And you reinstated or you added the VDOT signs for potential paved roads now. We've got, right?
That's right.
Recently, so, okay.
We just ordered those from a company in Culpeper.
Yep. Anything else on the list that we should discuss before we move on? I wish there was a way we could help.
Well, this is available to you. If you want to provide me with your top 10, I can compare 4 or 5 top 10s pretty easily, see where they coalesce. Some of the things don't necessarily take time for me to make.
Excuse me.
Number 8, where we have Mr. Ferris painting roofs. That's either happening or it's not happening, and he's either going to be straight with the court or he's not.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're just standing by and monitoring. I understand he was at Scrabble this morning.
The letter's still in the same place it was a month ago, isn't it?
That is moving pretty slowly.
Maybe on board meetings, we could just have what's been completed. The deadlines, like Ms. Smith just said that we had something due in October or something like that, I think would be nice to know what's coming down the pike that we've already voted on and agreed to, and are we gonna meet that deadline, are we not, that kind of thing. All right, I am ready to move on if you all are.
Yep.
What is next?
Electronic meeting.
Yes,
The state changed the relevant code sections for your authorization to meet through electronic participation. The board previously adopted policy 830. State code requires a policy to meet for electronic participation. What the state did in this last General Assembly session, they moved things around a little bit, and 2.2 3708.2 I pulled up on the screen. You can see effective until September 1, and then way down here at the end, effective September 1. They've jockeyed around, and now 3708.2 has to do with electronic communication during states of emergency, whereas before that was everything. And then 3708.3 is the section that basically you followed before that says people can participate electronically. So your policy had to be updated to align with the new code sections, and while doing that, I inserted more of the state code section into your policy so that it was easier to read by itself without cross-referencing back and forth between your policy and the state code. So for example, authorization allows two things. One, for members to meet electronically and for the board to meet fully electronically during times of emergency. I've expanded the statement that it does both, even though it did both before. Also included the specific reference to when this amendment would be approved, if it's today or if it's later, you put a different date in. Reference both code sections. Listed the specific wording from the state code in 830.3B about the policy needed and why it's needed and what things it has to include. And B1, A, B, C are all direct quotes from the code. There's actually 4 sections in the code. One of them, which is your house is 60 miles away from the meeting location, doesn't apply to you, so I didn't include it. Only included the 3, but just included the exact wording from the state. Clarified B2, which is the process you've been using. I made it a little more clear. Included the statement that is in the state code relative to the minutes, including the information. And then for emergency, made it mimic what was in now, what's 3708.2 verbatim, based on what's in that state code. So my recommendation is either move on this to stay up to speed with an amended policy, or kick it over to the Rules Committee to review for further information and take it up at a future meeting.
Well, I guess my question is, where was this on the item tracking chart?
It's not, but the state code changed, and so technically your old policy was out of date. I assume you'll want to have electronic participation in meetings, which
Right.
you did yesterday during a committee meeting, which maybe was or wasn't appropriate because we didn't have an active policy.
Right, but if we hadn't changed it, the state code changes would have superseded our county policy, and that would be what we would have to do, right?
No, because state code says you can only do this if you have a local policy.
Ah.
That's one of the things, that's really the reason why you have this. And to have the policy, and that's stated out in 833B.
Okay.
But should it also, I mean, maybe this is the type of getting in the weeds type of things that the committee would look at, but, I mean, we've got the code section, but shouldn't we say as amended?
It does say that, but the problem is they totally changed the code section. Whereas before, the relevant code section was 3708.2, they made it now 3708.3. And so think technically, probably okay, but I wouldn't want somebody to take you to FOIA task over it, and it's just easier to fix it.
Is there a bigger get out of jail free card we can build into this version to not have to do this as frequently?
Well, I would expect that the state won't, it's not normal for the state to do what they did this last session. They actually built in more flexibility than you have, and that some of your other bodies might choose to take up. If you're not a BOS, School Board, Planning Commission, or interestingly, controlled licenses like DPOR, then you can have fully electronic meetings, not during an emergency. That doesn't apply to the board. You're carved out of that. That was all part of the new 2.23708.3. The Regional Commission recently adopted some of that as an opportunity. Whether they'll ever do it or not, I don't know.
Well, we may need this soon, and if it's just to bring us into alignment with the Code of Virginia, I would make a motion that we go ahead and adopt this with the changes outlined, and you can add it to your list and mark it complete.
I'll second.
But this was probably a Saturday morning,
I know.
did it.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I'm sorry, who's the second?
Carney. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
And this escaped my radar until we went to the Regional Commission meeting and they had it on their agenda. I'm like, oh, crud.
Yeah.
Thank you for,
We got to do that.
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Monty.
Yes. I think Ms. Smith had asked some questions about, I'd shared, I think, updated tax receipt information, and Ms. Smith asked, well, how does this compare to what we were expecting?
Right.
And boy, that's a complicated question. So there are two documents attached to this agenda item. One is this tax review table, which I'll jump into in a second. The second is a document prepared by the Commissioner of Revenue, which I'm going to open first because it's more interesting, I think, regarding personal property and the pathway that you've taken over the last few years. And I'll let you go back and read on how she valued vehicles and J.D. Power and rough and clean and all that. But the interesting stuff is the charts.
Yep.
And so you can see the total value of personal property, and that's vehicles and any other types of personal properties, which here in Rappahannock essentially are vehicles. You can see in 2020, 67.9 million. 2021, it did bump up to 76. And then we had a lot of conversation during the budget development that in this current 2022 tax year, right, FY23, but 22 tax year, the value jumped up to 102.8 million, the value of all vehicles. And we did an analysis on the age of vehicles, and it wasn't that people just went out and bought a whole bunch of new vehicles. The age was about the same when you looked at the weighted age. You can see the personal property tax levy for those 3 years of 2.88, 3.2 last year, and then down to 3.1 this year. It's 3.1 this year because the board equalized, well, more than equalized that tax rate down to 310.
Right.
And I think it was maybe 315, and then at the last ditch, you kind of shaved a little bit more off, which dropped it even further. So you can see overall, even though the total value of vehicles went way up, the levy's gone down on average. She's created a chart here just to show you the average value, which should pretty well track. The blue bars is just the average value of vehicles. You can see. I don't know if any of my vehicles are worth those averages. And then she just did an example of a typical Rappahannock vehicle, 2019 GMC Sierra. What does it mean to that person over those years? And so you can see that from 2020 to 2022, you really did equalize in this case, or this type of vehicle. Even though the value shot way up to $63,000, the fact that you cut the rate dropped that tax back to about where it was, and it was a little higher last year because of the, So now these are pretty close numbers, so
Yep.
don't let the chart gyrations fool you.
This only happened once before in my time. I mean, not my time on the board, in my time. And that was one particular car, the Buick Grand National,
Grand National.
increased in value.
Well, it probably still is, but.
But these are run-of-the-mill vehicles.
Yes. Yeah, and it just is amazing when we looked at those values when we first got them, and you had an easier job than a lot of your peer boards because you don't have factories and all that stuff. And that's why the state gave boards the leeway to create a new class of personal property and tax that new class, kind of these personal vehicles, differently, and then keep the tax on those the factory equipment different. You don't have factory equipment. So that's the exciting table. This is the less exciting table, boring. This takes you through kind of what we look at when we're developing budgets. And the last chart, Mary used the tax years, and here on one, these are fiscal years, so tax years shifted back a year. So you can see there are 3 general sections to these tables and rows. The very top, the center, and the bottom, the center shaded gray. So you can see the adopted tax rate for personal property tax, 425 plus the 20 in the first column. By the time you get to the rightmost column for the budget you just adopted, 310 and 20. So the tax rates dropped. Then you can see the adopted budget tax revenue. That may be disconnected from any calculation out there. Ultimately, that's the number that was in the budget. So it included all the assumptions that happened at budget time, which one of those data endpoints is not the next set of information. You do not have usually the final assessed values of the total book by the time you adopt your agenda. We get close, but we don't have the final numbers by that time. So this next section are the final numbers, the final assessed values, 67 million. That number should be pretty similar to the number that Mary used on hers, over to the 102 million in 2023. Fire and rescue has changed how you provide tax incentive to the volunteer fire and rescue in 2021 and 2022. You can see the credit taken at the bottom. That was a straight credit number taken off their tax levy. They get their big tax bill and then they get a discount. Whereas in 23, you set a different tax rate of 0 for those vehicles. And so we're showing that higher up, and basically it's just reducing your overall assessed value that you can apply taxes to. So then you look at the final tax levy. That's just math. That's the assessed value divided by 100 times the tax rate, because it's $425 per $100 assessed value. And you get to that theoretical $2.8 million in 2021. The state, no car tax, they give you about $945,000 a year to spread amongst our taxpayers, and that gets your final tax levy. We know that we do not collect every dollar taxed in the year, and so when Ms. Nick and I prepare our revenue estimates, we usually assume that 93% of in-year collections for personal property, and then go in and do a little bit of a deeper dive on delinquent based on what's out there in recent years. So you can see the theoretical maximum is 1.9 million. The 93% is 1.8 million, but then there's delinquent that we think we'll get, but then there's the credit for the fire and rescue, and you end up with a final total estimated tax collection of 1.93 million based on those 93% in the delinquent. We actually collected not 1.957. And we didn't have the benefit of obviously the final collected number or the total estimated collection when we made the budget of 1.97. We had an earlier estimate of the 67 million. It was some other number based our forecasts on that. Same things in the next 2 years. So you can forecast 2.196 million. We've actually brought in 2.255. Strong year. So even though values were up, assessed values turned up, the collections were strong, which you would think would be opposite. I don't know, maybe it's because everybody had their federal money, they paid their taxes with it, I don't know. So this year, we don't know the end story. We don't know how much in taxes we will collect. We budgeted 2.32 million and 190,000 for fire. And the calculation, when you look at that bottom row with the 93% collection and estimate for delinquent, is 2.18. We're predicting to be under by a little bit. We'll see where we end up. So that's personal property.
So it looks like we always describe this as trying to hit a moving target because
Absolutely.
values were changing so rapidly.
Yep.
And we weren't even sure where we would end up by the time we actually
We also
issued the bills.
had no idea how much the fire and rescue number was going to be.
Right.
So that's $2.2 million in value of volunteer fire and rescue vehicles.
But if I'm looking at this correctly, if we take off the fire and rescue credit, the $40,000 number from our final levy last year, we're actually collecting about $45,000 less, projected to collect about $45,000 less than we did last year on the general fund number.
Yes, yeah. And that is.
Which is really amazingly close.
We dialed it in pretty well, even though we didn't know those numbers. We guessed at what they might be, and then kind of tweaked things at the last minute just because you wanted to lower the tax rate a little bit more.
Right.
And you made some assumptions on some other revenues. So that's personal property tax, and that's the extras. Now, the value of the 2.216 million in volunteer fire, that's 73,000, right, for 23. So you increase the value to volunteer fire and rescue by changing to the new mode of incentive from about 41,000 to 73,000.
Got it.
Real estate tax, everything's laid out the same way. You see the tax rate across the top row. You can see the adopted budget numbers across the top row. Final assessed value of real estate. And again, this year, totally different real estate value because of the reassessment. That's why you had to equalize by law. Pull out all the exempt property, and you end up with your net assessed value, which from 3 years ago, 1.6 million, now up to 1.9 million. That's the effect of your reassessment and why your rate dropped from 67 to 55. So the net levy is, in this current year, 10,496,000, plus about $1 million for fire. We assume collection of hire about 98% of in-year for real estate, and that's held pretty good. And then the delinquent on top of that. And so you can see you've budgeted 10.65. We're kind of predicting using that model of 10.5. We'll see where it ends up. Fire is about right. Although if you look at last year, the prediction was 10.7. We got 11 even. So that's because we must have exceeded the 98%, or the delinquent was more than the 267. I'm talking with Miss Nick. There will be another tax sale. Should be in this fiscal year, so that might juice things a little bit, although there's a tail on some of that money where it has to be held for a few years if there are no apparent errors. So I know there's a lot of data, but hopefully it was valuable for you to see some of what we're thinking about as we're trying to drive forecasts for revenue, how that compares to what you budgeted and how it compares to what actually came in.
It was really helpful to me to talk to Miss Graham, especially, it seemed a lot of calls that she was getting were in regards to the changes in the value, which unfortunately we have no control over. The value, we have to choose a way to value all properties and vehicles in comparison to each other. And by actually making a change last year from the clean loan to the rough trade-in, we were able to reduce the values, like she says in our document, quite a bit, by 8% on right from the top by doing that, and then tried to mitigate so much of it with the about 25% adjustment down.
And what the board talked about is you really don't know what next year is the bubble going to stay, is it going to burst? Is it going to stay inflated? And so you'll have to make some tough decisions on what do you do if values drop a lot. Do you want to try to keep the revenue equal and equalize the tax rate again, which means make the number bigger, which people don't tend to receive well? Or do you backfill that revenue with some other source and hope the sales tax keeps going way up and you kind of make it all work out? We'll be talking about that as we get into
Trouble with the sales tax numbers, we don't know how much of that is increased sales or because of stagflation.
all appetite for risk. We don't know, and so these will be interesting conversations.
By us relying more on a sales tax, we're actually
Risky.
penalize the people that are having to pay more for basic commodities.
I don't know if you're penalizing because you can't change the tax rate, but you're trying to understand and forecast how much will be spent.
But we're gambling that they're gonna keep spending that,
It is a gamble.
and that's
Yep.
not a good thing. In reality, we would rather see that number smaller.
But you're right in the sense that they might not spend more, but if inflation keeps going up, the number gets bigger.
Well, they have to spend more, right? Yeah,
No, but the number could, just for inflation.
But-
But the amount of spending.
The
Maybe
goods
we're not
they purchase
penalizing
is
them,
the
but
same.
We're basically
Yeah.
taking advantage of the fact that it's harder for them to make it.
Yep.
And the same thing happens with meals and lodging tax, right? So even if people are if they're only the same number of nights rented,
Right.
if the rate goes up, your tax revenue goes up.
But that is a tax on oneself that you make that decision. I mean, I can
Or
make a
meals,
decision not to order a pizza.
Well, and sales tax is somewhat similar, but there are the base staples which still go into the 1%.
You've gotta have, right, the staples, you gotta have coffee.
Yep.
And coffee and cookies and coffee.
Cookies.
And those continue to be included. The grocery tax was adjusted on the statewide, but the local 1% is still applied to those goods. So a lot of data, hopefully it's valuable.
It was good.
So I would just encourage folks too, if they have a question or wonder how they did in comparison to last year, to make sure not to just look at the value, but see how much they paid in tax.
Right.
Because I think some of the feedback that's been given is on the value.
People
Instead
actually
of the
saw how much they
actually-
paid in tax, there'd be a revolution.
Well,
Well, real estate tax, a lot of times their mortgage company gets it. For personal property, pretty much everybody gets the bill in their mail.
Correct.
And they say, what do you mean? My truck's worth 10,000, buy it.
Yeah.
I'll sell it to you
Right.
right now. And as Ms. Smith says, look at the overall levy, it's probably less than it was, last year.
Yeah, but that doesn't help. It may kind of ease the thought process some, but it doesn't really help. The bottom line is the bottom line.
well, and I mean, I wanted to do additional cuts in the budget, and there wasn't much of an appetite to do that this year. But in retrospect, even if we had shaved off an additional $500,000 is 2 pennies on the tax rate. You've got to, if we're going to make a substantial dent, you've got to know where that money comes from.
We've got a big chunk to fix right here.
Yeah.
We need money. That's why I wasn't very supportive of any real cuts, because a real cut would have had to been more than a couple pennies.
Yeah.
Well, thank Ms. Graham for that. That was very good
And
information.
Ms. Nick, with
Yep.
both of them.
Both of them. It was very informative.
Thank you.
Right. PHI CARES membership.
This is a request for contingency dollars, but I didn't think it was appropriate to bury it into the consent agenda. Each of your volunteer fire and rescue companies provide, it's not insurance, it's a membership to PHI CARES, which ultimately funds helicopter meta-flight transport with this company as a benefit for $45 per year per employee and their household. This is a benefit that could be added to the overall compensation package for employees, board members, anybody who's paid, as we view it. And when we looked at the census count of that, there's about 98 people who would fall into the full-time, part-time BOS, Planning Commission members, who people are paid, which would come to, so that's basically 100 at $45 per year is about $4,500. You could provide this coverage to all of your employees to be equal to what the volunteers are doing. And here in Rappahannock County, because we're fairly remote, the likelihood of having to fly for a significant event is probably higher than if you happen to live in Winchester, where the trauma center is right there and they're just going to take you there in an ambulance. So this is an opportunity to provide enhanced benefits to staff, and I think at a very modest price. There's attached information. This linked information provides everything you would want to know about PHI CARES, and it's actually a pretty broad area, not just Virginia, but our area, all the life flight, whatever they're called, all the helicopters that serve us, basically are in this program.
They'll take it.
They'll take it. It's them, basically.
Okay.
Do we know of anybody that's actually used it and put it through because I know a friend that they had a helicopter situation and it was a $40,000 bill.
Yeah, that's what ours was, and I was a member of the board then.
So have we had anybody use this and actually find that it was totally covered?
I don't know. Harold, do you know if any of the volunteers have?
I'm not aware of any, but I also have not heard any complaint more broadly that it's not been paid, as far as I know, they're paid.
$45 to avoid a $40,000 bill, to me, seems like an,
I'm not sure they can do it for 40. Because that's what ours was 25 years ago.
Do you know how many members there are? Is it pretty large in the state? Is it?
I don't have that information. No.
Seems like a pretty good idea. Aaron Oyster in this county had a flight last year. I know
Right.
the bill, and it was
So, you know, they.
more than $40,000.
Yeah, I would think so.
They'll sell it to you to cover all your citizens if you wanted to do that. That's a totally different conversation. So then now you're talking about how many households you have, which is maybe 3,700, and is it permanent households or semi-households? And what does that number add to?
I think this is a great benefit.
I'd sooner just advertise the fact that it's available and let people make that personal decision.
Well, to your point, that since we are located where we are with the services that we have, it does seem like you're more at risk, or there's more of a chance of you perhaps needing it with a severe accident out here. I mean, there's just.
Or a heart issue, or a stroke
an
issue.
event.
or-
Yeah, there's sometimes they can't fly, but when they can, it's of utmost importance.
Now, does this cover the family too?
So it's the household, and I did look into that. There it is. The household to include immediate family members and up to 3 non-family members who reside in the same household on a full-time basis. So, you know, there's probably some hair splitting. What if my son or daughter's in college? Or what if, are they in my household, are they not? And some of that, you know, you'd have to work through some of that.
Who's the plan administrator? Do everybody on their own as far as that goes?
Those additional questions I'm not sure about. I think, I don't know, it would be an ill-informed answer for me to answer that. I have not.
Well, I like the concept.
So for $4,500, I think it's really a rounding error on your compensation package and a nice benefit. I'll share this with Dr. Grimsley as well. This would it'd probably be beneficial for them too, for also not a very big investment. And if we find out that the $4,500 investment results in red tape or issues when somebody goes to use it, you know, you don't have to continue it
Right.
in the future.
It's an annual fee.
Yeah, yeah. I would say it's a premium coverage, but I think it's very carefully structured to not be considered insurance. It's a membership.
Bless you. Bless you.
It's a membership. And I think there's regulation that probably is behind that. So if the board's so inclined, you can allocate $4,500 in your contingency to fund this, and then staff will work on the process to, I think it'll be a little bit complicated, because we'll have to find out how they onboard, because they're gonna need information. And so there'll probably have to be some link that they provide, that we provide then to everybody who goes in and self-registers or something. I'm not exactly sure. And
If you need a motion, I put that form in of a motion, what you just said, that we set aside $4,500 of the contingency fund and allow you to allocate staff time to check into it further.
And hopefully this may be an October task when our new person shows up.
I'll second Mr.
Yep.
Frazier's motion.
Yep, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
What I didn't say and what is listed here is some of our employees or people in this census of 98 are already covered.
Right.
There's sheriff is a member of Company 3, and you know, you have all these different part-time paramedics are maybe covered at their day job. So it's
Got it.
probably not that big of a number.
Okay,
But
gotcha.
Thank you. Number 4, billing.
Madam Chair, can we take a 5 or 10
5-minute
minute
break.
break?
I was just thinking about that myself. Let's say 5 and see what happens.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we can get started again. We are on the number 4 under new business, I think.
yes. The Fire and Levy Board discussed this matter at their meeting last night. Public Safety Committee, too many committee boards. Public Safety Committee considered this at their meeting last night. The county fire department, and fire and rescue department that includes your county paramedics, when they provide service on a call jointly with one of the volunteer companies, and complete a crew with that volunteer company. So the paramedic goes and meets a driver from Station 7 or whatever other Station 3, or they meet up with a EMT from one of those stations and they complete a crew, or they assist a crew or whatever. If the care is being provided by the county paramedic, the volunteer company cannot charge EMS cost recovery for that ALS treatment. They can charge for the transport for their ambulance. They can't charge for the actual ALS treatment, or BLS if it's, I guess, a BLS call. So the county could charge if we wanted to, and we have EMS cost recovery account under the county through which 3-4 companies use, and that they charge their services, and then the county just receives the money and pushes it back out to them, and the county could just simply start charging for our own calls when our paramedics are in responsible charge on that transport. Rather than doing that, given the model that we have, Mr. Polster and I felt that it made more sense to allow the volunteer companies to charge for the services rendered by county paramedics when they were on their units and completed that crew. So if our paramedic met up with Company 7 and they had a BLS unit and we upgraded them to an ALS unit and care was provided and they went to the hospital, then Company 7 could charge for the services rendered by our paramedic and keep that money.
As an ALS unit.
As an ALS unit. If they can only do that if there's an agreement between the county and that volunteer company that says they can do that. If there is no agreement and the county doesn't charge, the volunteer company cannot charge for those services. They can only charge for that transport. So Mr. Polster and I developed an agreement that would allow volunteer companies, if they so chose, to charge for the paramedic aid provided by county paramedics in exchange for essentially following 4 core policies of the county. Those policies are listed in the agreement, and all of the county policies for the county fire department, fire and rescue staff are posted on the webpage. That's the apparatus driver release, the vehicle response and operations, sexual harassment, and anti-substance abuse. This would be a floor, and the volunteer companies could have more stringent policies if they wanted to in those categories or any other categories. The conversation at the Public Safety Committee meeting got protracted with discussion of, well, what happens as an agreement? What happens if there's disputes in the agreement? Who should be reviewing and deciding on how disputes should be resolved? The draft agreement set that responsibility to the Public Safety Committee, whose decision would be final. The recommendation from the Public Safety Committee to the board was to endorse the agreement with a modification to paragraph 5, which basically shifts the Public Safety Committee to be a review and recommendation body to the Board of Supervisors, who would make final determinations for any debate. I'm not sure when paragraph 5 would come into place, but we thought it was important to have some way to manage disputes. Because the county is not billing for any services, this doesn't come to a point where there's a dispute between the county and a volunteer company of who is able to bill for a certain service. It's always the volunteer company, because we're not billing for anything on the county side. The only area I can think of where there could be disputes of whether the policies are in place or not, it doesn't say they have to follow the policies, they just have to adopt the policies. And we would hope that they would follow the policies.
I thought about that much later, not to interrupt, but I think this is a good time to say that. just because they say that they're going to follow it, that doesn't mean that they will. So if there's a problem somewhere out there where they don't want to adopt these policies, and this is a method whereby we're trying to force them to adopt them, that still doesn't mean that they'll follow them later.
Well, and they don't have to. Nobody is forcing anybody to adopt any policies. What this is
It's a carrot
doing,
and stick approach.
well, no, it's a carrot and stick.
If you, you're right,
Yeah.
the carrot and the stick. You're offering the carrot, but you're gonna use the stick to get them to sign it.
Well, and I think it can be viewed that way. I view it more of, if your county employee is going to complete a crew and be on an apparatus with a volunteer member, it's not unreasonable for there to be assurance that substance abuse, sexual harassment, vehicle response operations, and apparatus driver release have core common policies.
Don't they have
And companies who
policies in
don't
place
want to
now,
do this
though?
don't have to do this.
They don't have policies like that in place now where they have to have
Not
an
all
EVOC
companies.
driver?
There's been a long-standing conversation among the chiefs on whether they should or shouldn't do this. And some companies might not want to do this, have common policies or core essence of their policies, and some companies might. My understanding right now is that companies 7 and 9 have already signed the document that's here before you today. They're willing to do what this says. Other companies might not want to, and not want to collect the revenue for your paramedics. Now, the Board of Supervisors could say that you just want to give the money to them and they don't have to follow any policies. That's not staff's recommendation, but ultimately, you make the decisions.
Well, my biggest problem with it was, number one, I hadn't seen it, and you've already got 2 companies that signed on to it, you said. But there was language in there that's not authorized by this board.
They signed on to the version that is on the screen right now, today, this morning.
But you said before this was even changed last night that you had 2 signatures.
They signed on to the last version, or one, I think, signed on to the last version, and 2 have signed on to this version. As I said at the public state, this is an opportunity. Nobody is requiring the volunteer companies to do this, and 100% we would prefer that our paramedic never completes a crew, and that the volunteer crew does the transport. That's our goal. That's our mission goal, that our paramedic gets to the scene, stabilizes, and watches the ambulance drive away. That's a win.
That may not happen.
It may not, and in the cases.
Back to the language from last night.
Okay.
We had the county staff pushing forward something that had not been approved by this board. And that was my big beef. The biggest problem with that was, number one, it wasn't authorized by this body. And the second part is that we were telling somebody they had to sign something if they wanted to be able to bill for it. So that was a carrot and a stick. The stick is that they wouldn't be able to bring a redress of grievances to this elected body. This is the only elected body in the county that is delegated constitutionally with talking about matters like this.
And that's in the version that's on the screen right now. And so that's why we brought it to the Public Safety Committee for the input, and that input was received and it was modified.
I wish in the future this board would see things like that before it gets out on the street. Because this is what caused a problem several years ago when the county attorney at that time drew up something and basically started a firestorm. We had people come up here. Harold was probably here that day, and they were threatening to throw the keys on the table.
Well, we can't develop documents like this as a committee. It doesn't work.
I did it.
Well,
I had to clean up the mess that was made by the county attorney.
Well, staff puts forward an opportunity for the board, for the volunteer companies. We think it's a good idea. If it's not possible to create a document like this sitting around a table in a board meeting like this. It just isn't. So we
did it with a separate committee that we put together.
So
but I had to do it to clean up the mess.
Okay. Well,
I don't want to see another mess.
Whether the board wants to move forward to this or not, that's why it's here today. The Public Safety Committee recommended that you do with the modifications shown on the screen.
Do any companies have specific issues with the policies that are the floor policies that are in this document that anybody's aware of?
I only have anecdotal information that
Okay, but nothing.
all of the companies essentially agreed until one company didn't agree, and they decided to shelve it for a later conversation, and that conversation keeps getting delayed and delayed and delayed. So maybe they'll come to a conclusion at some point in time, maybe they won't. If some companies want to start getting this revenue now and think that our policies already cover these things and they don't care, then let them take the money. If other companies are worried that these policies are going to cause them to do something that they don't do right now, then that's a weighed decision by those companies.
I see this as an opportunity to move forward with something. This is eminently reasonable, unless somebody has something specifically wrong with one of these things that's documented that we can say, hey.
Well,
I
I haven't had time to research it,
We should
but
have.
I can tell you what I've had one conversation with some, a volunteer, and the fire services agreement that it took us a while to work out with the companies that were close to walking out the door and leaving the keys on the table. I mean, they actually threatened to do that here, in this room, in a board meeting. And they were very, very valuable people. All of our volunteers are very valuable people, but these were people that had been in it for a number of years and were well respected in the community. And they were that upset to make those statements. But the thing is, and I have not had the time to look at the document yet, but the fire service agreement is supposed to spell out how the process works for developing these standard operating procedures, and now we've got the county doing it and telling the volunteers that they have to.
What the services agreement says that the association will ensure that the companies follow the association agreement, and all we hear is that the association can't tell us what to do.
But they're supposed to develop the
They don't
standard
follow it.
operating procedures.
They don't follow it.
Well, see, this is not getting back to the board somehow.
So I'm just a real quick question though. These are policies, not protocol. So for instance, in these, I'm just wondering, like they seem very reasonable on the surface. Sexual harassment, substance abuse, all this kind of stuff. Is there a specific thing where someone's like, no, this is unreasonable? Like, for instance, we need this agreement so that people, if they want to, it makes sense for the county to know that everybody that's in a collection here is agreeing to the same kind of things when it comes to things like sexual harassment. I mean, that is reasonable. And so my question is there anybody that has a specific thing that says, hey, this is going to get us into trouble, or hey, this is something that we can't do? I don't think it's that. I think institutional knowledge.
I think how it's being forced on them, or they feel that it's being forced on them by the county instead of them doing it internally.
Well, isn't it more just sort of like a personnel document when you sort of take a job? I mean, we're funding this, so it's like you take a job and you're like, okay, well, here's part of the requirements of a job. It's not necessarily forced. It's just this is a lot of money, and
Right.
we're making sure that everybody's protected.
But I'm not sure that we're actually following the procedure that we agreed to, that they all agreed to
There's
several years
nothing
ago.
in the services agreement that speaks to EMS cost recovery funding being charged for by the county and offered to the volunteers.
I understand that, but that's not what this is actually. This is actually tying that funding mechanism to these other documents that we say that you have to abide by, or you have to adopt them.
It's an opportunity, and no company has to do this, period.
It's only when
All right, so
1,400's involved.
Why are they in there then? If number one, we can't make them do it.
If you can find a way to make the independent volunteer companies follow a set form of agreements or policies, we would love to understand that, because we think, as Mr. Polster said, operational unity with administrative autonomy is important and critical. These are independent companies. But
Right.
when you're standing side by side on a hose or at the side of a patient, there should be certain expectations that everybody has. They know what's going on and they know what the standard of care is. We can't require that. The services agreement states that the association is going to ensure that policies are being followed. The association bylaws state the association can't do anything. So here, in this situation, the county can provide an opportunity for these companies to get more revenue if they want. In exchange, we are asking them to adopt core policies.
But we can't enforce them. So how?
We can, that's the intent of this agreement, and that's, I guess, ultimately, the only thing, as I started this conversation, disputes could come to the board that a company is not following a sexual harassment policy. And if your staff member goes on a call with a volunteer and is harassed, do you want recourse? That's our responsibility. Or goes onto an ambulance and, heaven forbid, a volunteer, which I'm sure is very few and far between, has a substance abuse issue, and there's something happens to our employee, is that I don't want that on my shoulders. There ought to be policies in place.
Right.
So our staff is not going to drive our vehicle.
How are we going to be able to enforce that on a call-by-call situation?
Well, one, we'll stop paying them the money because they won't have followed the requirements. But beyond that, unless you renegotiate the services agreement, you may never be able to do it. But at least in this instance, you could say, if you're not going to at least follow these things, then you're not going to bill for our paramedics.
But that's not a preemptive measure. That's not proactive, that's reactive.
We have been seeking collaborative cooperation for a year on the policies. And there are draft policies that have gone through the chiefs and edited through the chiefs, and there's no
This is back to where they feel that they are being hammered on by the county, and when we brought that up as board members or pointed it out in emails, it seems to continue.
That was a collaborative process. Nobody forced them to adopt any policies. We went to them and said, hey, we think we should have joint policies. Let's work together to get it done. There was a progress to move forward, and then it stalled. So the county's not forcing anything to happen. We can't, because the services agreement doesn't allow us to do
But
it.
as a member of one of the elected members of this body that represents a certain district that has a functional company in it, I don't know these things until somebody tells me this. And until I get to a point where, hey, did you see what they say? And I look at it and I can't focus on the forest because of the trees when I see where people that county taxpayers are being told that you're not going to have the ability to come before the Board of Supervisors for redress of grievances. I get focused on that.
Okay, well, that's resolved. So let's take that off the table. That was just a thought that the Public Safety Committee made a good place to do that. The board is probably a better place. Done.
Who thought, the public safety thought that?
No, Mr. Polster and I. And he said he pulled that from another locality. So the board, you didn't think that was a good idea? The Public Safety Committee didn't think
It's
that
a
was a good idea?
terrible idea. It's worse than not a good idea. It's a terrible idea.
And therefore, the Public Safety Committee made a wonderful idea and suggestion to take it out of the document.
If we're going to work with the volunteers, that kind of mentality has got to stop before it gets this far.
Perfect. So now it's done. And it
No. It can't happen anymore like that. It can't happen anymore like that.
Okay.
Because it's making volunteers unhappy. And if we really want to go back to what you said, where the perfect scenario is, they get out, they pick up the patient, they package them, and they deliver them to the hospital, and everybody's happy. If we want that to actually be the end result, we want that to be what happens, we've got to quit this kind of stuff.
Well, quite frankly, I don't think anything in this paragraph 5 is egregious.
When you're denying due process to the people that pay taxes in this county, yes, sir, you are.
They're getting due process through the Public Safety Committee, but it's
No. That is an appointed body that has no ability to make those decisions.
by the Board of Supervisors. But it's a moot point.
But they're
It's
not a
moot point.
dispositive body, they're an advisory body.
And it's so now
We
that point
fixed
is moot. The Public Safety
I-
Committee
I-
said
But the point's
What I
not
want to
that-
get across right here, if I don't do anything else today in this meeting, what I want to get across right here is I don't want to see that anymore as a Board of Supervisor member.
Well, I will be the first to say that I am fallible, my staff is fallible. We thought it was appropriate. You have corrected our view. It's been changed in the document that's before
I
you.
think you've oversimplified the situation, and I'll just say, I would appreciate in the future, if an item of this magnitude is being written, that we should be able to review it as the Board of Supervisors before it goes to an advisory body, so that we can have input in advance.
Yeah, it's
I
not,
don't understand how it goes to an advisory body one day, is approved, and then it's on our agenda the very next day. Do you feel like you've gotten an ample amount of feedback on this? Because I don't.
I don't see what the problem is here. Genuinely.
I don't
No,
know
it's-
that there
but
is
it's-
a problem, but I don't know that there isn't a
Sort
problem.
of the tenor's like up here, and so I'm
But
sitting here
but
looking
it's
at this.
fundamental, it's fundamental. We're telling these people, if you read the
Right.
document,
I
there
heard
is
that.
no redress of grievances. That's a fundamental American process.
So that in red is fixed. Okay, so my question is, we have something we could approve today. If you guys don't approve, but we want to go over it more, is that something you prefer to do? Or I mean, I'm sitting here reading this, and I'm saying, well, okay, guys, they don't have to sign it.
I mean, you can sign it at any time
Yeah, they
or
don't have
not
to.
at any
You
time.
can also come back and redo it or tear it up.
Well, a lot of people might not even know that it exists, and I just think we
It's
should
all-
maybe let it
the
sit for a
chiefs know
month.
it.
It's been to the chiefs. It was supposed to be at the association meeting at the last meeting, but the head of the Chiefs Committee, Mr. Chief Burke, did not attend the association meeting, so it got pushed off.
Well, I don't know why there's such dysfunction. I mean, this has been going on for more than 25 years that I've been involved, and it really is tiresome that they can't get along. Harold, do you know why people can't get along?
Harold's retiring, I think.
But I don't understand it, but I know we have to somehow work around that, but when I see something like this, I don't know how to explain to the people that we're working with them when something like this happens. It should have never gotten this far.
So do you guys want to talk about next meeting, or?
I mean, there's money that we will not be sharing with the companies that have signed on if we wait. So,
I can vote to adopt it now myself, but I could also defer to Ms. Smith's suggestion that we look at it and digest it, maybe talk to some of those people in our community about it. But
That's what, $925?
If y'all three want to vote for it, I'll vote for it too, but I don't like it being on one agenda yesterday and it being on our agenda today, and that's all we get to see of it or hear of it.
Well, we have a really great opportunity, for instance, today, like, if we approve this, nobody has to sign it, and so the two have committed or have, but the other ones can say, whoa, 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 no, I don't like this, but I will sign it if yada, 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 and then we can come back and say, oh, okay,
sure.
and just
It may
continue the
need to be
conversation, and
revised.
then, and then people can get reimbursed.
Well, and I think that if that can be included in the motion, that, that we're passing it today as a.
subject to future editorial.
Yes,
Are you making
because
a
I
motion?
really do, I guess I am. Oh, Lord, help me. So I would, I guess, make a motion that we adopt the agreement that came out of the Public Safety Committee last evening.
Who would be authorized to execute it?
I would imagine the chairman of the board would be authorized to execute it.
Yeah, whoever.
Is there somebody else?
It could be anybody the board says. I mean, I put my name in the recommended action for convenience, but the chair can do it it doesn't matter as long as it's behind the vote of a board.
How do we want to put this? As a, what was in a very nice way you phrased it? Subject to further review and
Okay.
revision?
Subject to further.
Subject to subsequent amendment.
Thank you very much.
Very nice.
Thank you, Mr. Goff.
That was clutch, Art. I appreciate it.
All right, do you have
I just still
Who's
don't know
gonna
who's
sign it?
signing.
Did you authorize?
who's going to authorize?
Chairman.
Okay, aye. We have a motion, do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second, any further discussion?
I would hate for folks to miss out on an opportunity for some billable funding. I don't like the way it was done, and I hope it won't be done that way in the future.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? MOU.
Well, I'm sure this falls into the exact same category of this is the first time you're seeing this document. It was drafted by myself. This is an MOU between the county and Amosville Volunteer Fire and Rescue. The document's been transmitted to Amosville Volunteer Fire and Rescue Chief and President. We've not heard back from them. This comes out of conversations with FEMA regarding the Assistance to Firefighter grant that Amosville was so fortunate to receive, and I believe they're receiving $660 odd thousand to purchase new Motorola portable radios, which we understand is 153. I think the draft MOU says 155. Those radios are purchased by the volunteer company, will be assets of the federal government entrusted to the volunteer company. But the volunteer company doesn't have the wherewithal to program those radios because that is reserved for the 3 counties that own the radio system because of the nature of the trunked P25 system and the fact that security requires that the programming process be controlled. For example, our neighboring law enforcement doesn't necessarily want any volunteer in this county to have access to their law enforcement or SWAT channels. And so that is very controlled, and we just don't hand out the keys to programming. It's not like in the past where you just tune it into 154.395 and you hear it. It's a little computer and it has to be programmed with the right information. Mr. Polster, myself, and J.P. Carter had a online meeting with FEMA representatives to figure out how we could make this work because the grant application stated that Amosville was going to program them and then each of the companies who received the radios were going to be responsible for operation and maintenance, which is not really workable with the radios and the regional system. FEMA said that if there is an agreement between Amosville and the county, we could continue basically in the mode that we use now, which is the county, like we did when the Harris radios came in, and when the Harris system came online, the county manages the programming of the Motorola and Harris radios and the coordinated process that it takes. We also manage the maintenance and operations of the radios with the maintenance service contract that we have with Wireless Services, Wireless Communications, Inc. So FEMA said, if you put that in writing, then that'll work. Another issue is that this board sought and received a grant from the state for portable and mobile radios. Right around the time I got here, a volunteer helped with that application. I think the association did. And those radios must remain in use through December of 2024, based on the grant.
The Harris radios.
The Harris radios. That was a $160,000 received grant for a value of $320,000 of radios. We need to keep using those radios, or else we're going to have to pay the grant back. So this MOU also states that those radios would be used for EMS purposes, which was the nature of the grant, so the ambulance throughout the fleet, as well as for Sperryville Volunteer Rescue, because Sperryville Volunteer Rescue was the one company that wasn't listed in the AFG grant that Amosville submitted. And it might have been an oversight, or they might not have realized that EMS companies are eligible for AFG grants. But the FEMA representative was very clear to us that if you weren't listed in the grant, you can't use the radios, and that included the county's fire department, or sheriff, or state police, or whoever. So the Harris radios can be used for Sperryville and the county and the ambulances throughout the fleet until December 2024, but staff believes that a common radio is important, definitely on a fire scene, which is why fire would all have the same. But then on a mixed scene, at an ambulance or something, you grab a radio and you don't know how the buttons work or whatever, that's dangerous. So we think in December 2024, we look to reallocate radios again, possibly partnering with the schools or sell to our partners in Culpeper or Fauquier who are using the Harris radios, and replace those Harris radios with Motorola radios that match what was bought on the grant.
Good.
Which is going to take some money, which maybe we'll get a grant for, maybe we won't. But that could be a couple $100,000 because they're very expensive radios. So all that is baked into this MOU that basically, in a nutshell, says that the county will program, there's a bunch of preamble, but the bottom line is that the Amosville agrees that the county must and shall control the implementation programming process for the new radios, and the county agrees to coordinate with Amosville to program the radios to include appropriate P25 Phase 2 standards, radio ID numbering, radio alias requirements, top group fleet map, how all the radios are programmed and which channels are in each radio, and then button assignments coordinated with Amosville, which presumably they're going to coordinate with all the rest of the companies. That the cost to initially program the radios are borne by the grant, that the cost for accessories, because the grant didn't purchase vehicle chargers and other accessories like holsters and stuff, that those things need to be available before they're implemented because they're an integral part. So I think they've been ordered, we're not sure. And that we both agree we're not going to push these into this fleet until everything is available. That the county will continue the maintenance service contract that we have with Wireless Communications or another Motorola service shop if we need to change, and incorporate the new radios into that and take off the old radios. And the county's going to continue to pay for that, which right now that is funded in the radio O&M budget department. The county will incorporate all of these radios into the master database of all the radios that we have, so we can keep track, because it's very complicated. It's not.
It sounds like it's very complicated.
Every radio has a unique serial number and ID. You key that radio, and dispatch knows exactly that radio was keyed.
Yeah.
And it also has duress buttons, so you know that radio. So you can't start mixing them up.
That's either the Harris or the Motorola.
Either, any of the P25 trunk radios.
They're all addressed.
They're all addressed. And that basically they're federal and Amosville assets. The county will include the radios as Amosville assets on the VFIS insurance. And we'll help them do it because, you know, we have the policy, but they have control of the asset, and we'll work together to make sure these $800,000 of radios are insured. That's basically what it says.
Is this going to be very difficult for you, staff, to keep up with where those Harris radios are for the next year and a half?
Well, we do it now. It's always hard, and it's extra hard when a widget bigger than your cell phone costs, these APX 8000s might cost $8,000 a piece. When you have something that expensive that is that small, it's very scary to be able to keep track of them. But fortunately, they register with a system, so we know that they're still active. So when they go dark is when we begin to worry, and you put insurance claim or whatever. So this is just preliminary. We haven't heard back from Amosville. They might want some changes, but I wanted to get it in front of the board so you understood where this stood. We believe the radios are here, ready to be programmed, and I think the accessories have been ordered, but we're not sure. We don't have insight to that. The company 3 is dealing with all of that.
So how many L3 Harris radios do we have?
We have,
Is that 39?
There were 39 purchased from a grant. Those are portable radios.
Right.
And we have a whole bunch of old Motorola XTS 5000 radios that are no longer supported by Motorola. It's best effort. If one of those breaks, we might be able to make it work by getting parts from another radio or something.
So we have 39 plus whatever that is, and we're getting, Amosville's getting 153.
Right, but they can't go to 7 or the county. And some of the county radios are currently being used by state police partners and VDOT partners. So there's a,
What is the term of this one, the new one?
I don't know.
We don't have the limitations on the Harris radios that we will on the Motorola's?
The Motorola's, I'm told, and this is way before my time.
You haven't seen the application?
We did finally get a copy of the application. But the Motorola radios, I'm told, may have come from an old grant. But JB mentioned that. I haven't seen it. Richie might know about it.
Yeah, I hate to say this, but this is just a continuation of the volunteers not wanting to work either together or with the county?
I think it could have been better collaboration,
You're being generous.
but at the end of the day, if we get 153 state-of-the-art public safety radios into the volunteer fire and rescue system, that's a good thing. And we want it to happen, and we want to facilitate making it happen.
The Motorola's are good too. I know, and I don't mean anything negative toward Harris, but I know when we went with Harris, a lot of people wish we'd gone with Motorola.
Well,
And it seems like it would be a better.
I could be wrong, but I think a Harris is the subsidiary spin-off child of GE radios. And they were,
There have been so many mergers, and so basically there are two radios out there now for all practical purposes, and it's L3 Harris and Motorola. There's some other small ones, but they're the big ones, and L3 Harris has, more than any time in the past, been gaining market share on Motorola.
if
but-
they're part of the old GE,
There's a reason
They're
why
tough radios.
Motorola costs,
I don't,
Well,
but they're not,
sometimes
they're
twice
just
as
not
much.
as user-friendly maybe as a Motorola. Motorola's like, you know, up there.
yeah, I think not only you're buying maybe superior physical technology, the intellectual property behind it and the updates and all of that is more robust with Motorola. Some of our partners we got the old mobiles for our vehicles. We've been pretty stable. We've had some minor issues. Fauquier got the latest, greatest, just came out from Harrison. They had nothing but trouble.
Really.
And they're just now ironing out the firmware so that they're through some of that. But they probably got twice as many of them as they could have got if they got Motorola radios. For the same price.
So would the 153 radios take care of the foreseeable needs for fire and rescue?
Except for Sperryville
Except-
Rescue.
right.
Now, Company 9 is a totally different odd situation in that Warren has provided them radios and we've provided them radios. They got double radios right now. They've got Warren Motorola radios and Rappahannock Harris radios. That'll get straightened out one way or another. And they're in the grant for more Motorola radios.
I was gonna say, now they're gonna have a third radio.
Well, we would pull back the Harris radios for sure, but that's a different discussion for a different day, and we're trying to work through that.
But these are all portables.
These are all portables, all
So
portables.
the school system doesn't use that many portables.
Well, part of the, so the tabletop exercise suggested enhanced communication would be helpful. I'll leave it at that. So it might make sense for them to have a greater portable capability at some point in the future. And coming out of December 2024, maybe that's a use for Harris radios, I don't know. At the same
Can't use
time,
them now,
no, because they're not an EMS agency.
part of that grant.
Yeah. I say that with trepidation, knowing that portable radios this far into our coverage area, into a heavy structure, is not the best plan.
What if they self-identify as an EMS company?
Well, I'm not, if you're willing to risk the 160 to pay back, then I am too.
So you'd like to focus on Amosville?
So we forwarded it on to Amosville,
I did.
and so I wanted to get in front of you. If you think the wording is fine, then you can approve it, subject to Amosville approving it. If they come back and say, yeah, that's perfect, let's do it, then we can roll. If they come back and say, no, we want to change these 10 things, then it's going to have to come back to you.
I don't have the esoteric knowledge to know whether it's a good or not, you know?
Well, I mean, this
Kinda
radio,
relying
that
on-
radio, and all that, the bottom line is that the county has to control programming. The county will pay for maintenance. And that's what you're signing up to pay for the maintenance, which county you pay for anyway, but it's centralized.
I know
One maintenance
a
service.
lot of this language is just boilerplate for the history of how this happened and how we got to.
Well, the whole top part tries to lay out where we are, why we're here, and just because anybody else trying to read the bottom part, you have no chance unless you have some idea of why we are where we are.
Remind me again, if you could, who actually does the physical programming? Sean Polster, the sheriff?
Who does the what?
Motorola.
Physical programming.
We pay them?
Richie used to do that, and my position is, this is life and death, and we aren't experts, and we bring in experts to do that. So it's either gonna be wireless communications, well, be wireless
They
communications.
can come on site and do it with a laptop or
They
or
would,
whatever.
and that's what we did when we rolled out the new system. We went to each station, and they went and they plug in one radio, have this master list, because it's not just, this radio is this radio. Here's the serial number, here's the radio ID. It is alias this, and it's a protracted process to make sure it all lines out, so that when that particular radio has a push to talk, the console says it was, engine 1403 Bravo.
Well, that's the way it should be.
It's involved. Or when they push the alert button, that it does what somebody said, like, they push the alert button, and it's a hot mic for 10 seconds, and, sirens start going off on all the other radios and in dispatch, but they know the exact radio that it was. Or it doesn't have a hot mic. Whatever the companies agree on, they gotta figure that out.
There's a cost to that, but it's not that big a cost.
Well, we have that now, but it's a coordinated process that can't happen happenstance 7 different ways.
Thank you. I'll agree with that. And with that being said, I'll put form the form of a motion that we adopt this agreement in the present form, subject to future editorial changes if necessary.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No opposed. Board committee reports. Building committee, you want to wait till tonight?
Oh, well, we can talk a little bit about that. Unfortunately, I had to leave early at the last meeting, so, and Mr. Glennie had to leave a little before that, so it was really, we got a lot done, but it seems like I'm not the one that should be talking about it.
Well, we were about wrapped up when you left.
I think that the conversation just sort of trailed. I think all the action items were before that. But I would just say that, I think it's always been the position of the members of the building committee that we don't want to get out in front of the public, and we want to do what the public and the people and the taxpayers of Rappahannock County and the Board of Supervisors, the direction that you all want us to
Yeah,
take.
equally important, we want all this body to be on the same page. Unfortunately, it won't be at the same time, but the rest of the board should be very close behind the building committee.
And in that vein, I would just say, we decided, given the scope that had developed at that time, that it was time to come back kind of on the quarterly basis we had initially discussed at the beginning of the year and give a report to the board of progress. And I do think some things were, I don't know what the exact word is, maybe misconstrued or not relayed accurately in the press, and that's very unfortunate. There has not ever been, either on this board or on the building committee, any intention to take down this courthouse. In fact, there has always been exactly the polar opposite position from both this board and all of the members of the building committee, that this campus and these historic structures are cherished by us, and that any efforts we make in our work toward these buildings are to preserve them and equip them to be successful and viable buildings and a vital part of our county campus for many years to come. And that's been very unfortunate because, bad news travels fast. And inaccurate bad news travels especially fast. So I do think that that's very regrettable. But as I've told some folks that have reached out to me with concerns, and rightly so, if I had heard that, I would be very concerned too. I think the silver lining in this is we will get some public involvement and find out how very much people love and value these buildings and have more involvement in the process for some time to come.
Thank you.
And I'll say that again tonight, probably not as well.
So that the board has put money behind that value of $1 million in this fiscal year budget, and the building committee is, I'll say,
Yeah.
struggling, and had a good resource in the meeting who left with Dale afterwards, and they took a tour, and we're thinking that resource who does, works on historic buildings and restores them, or whatever the right word is, will be a good avenue to invest some of those dollars, or help us invest those dollars the right way to preserve this and the other historic
Yeah,
buildings.
I think somewhere along the way it got lost. I didn't actually read the article the same way that some people have read it. That, so I don't even know how things got started like it did. But anyway, we know, both on this board and the members of the building committee and the constitutional officers that have to deal with court, it's never been our intention to disrupt the process, because we know what a burden that would be. That's not something we want to see. Mr. Goff, the sheriff, Peggy, nobody involved in the process, didn't want to see that disrupted. Judges, we can aggravate them a little bit. But
Anyway, more to
you can only
come.
go so far with that.
Okay.
Randy Vaughn will be here tonight.
Oh,
In
great.
person.
Oh, great.
That's fantastic.
That's cool.
Recreational facility. Oh, sorry, were you done?
No, I was just going to say there ought to be somebody checking downstairs that there's no pies.
He
Or
told
eggs.
me he's been through this a few times, and what was the line? He said, everybody wants to be an architect, but nobody wants to take a pay cut.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Mr. Van, recreational facilities.
Yep, we had a meeting. We elected a new chair, Becky Burr. And Missy McCool stayed the vice chair. And we had some robust discussions around the playground and about maintenance. And I think we're really moving in the right direction. And I think that we should be able to get the rest of the privacy fence done, and we've just kind of broken up some tasks so that we can tackle kind of just doing some things that I think need to happen at the park with safety and upgrades and maintenance that is just kind of needed. So we're on a good path, and yeah, we had a good meeting.
Excellent. That was
Did you
good.
get the emails about trespassers?
Mm-hmm. And we will discuss with the neighbors. We'll have an ongoing discussion, and I have found that the neighbors to be nothing but kind and open to discussion. So as long as we can just keep the temperature down and just keep talking about it, I think we're okay.
It occurred to me that one of the conditions for continuing those events was that there would be an adequate number of folks from RLEP on the ground to make sure that people stayed in areas that were appropriate for those activities. And it seems like maybe that part of the agreement needs to be highlighted.
But according to the email, it looked like people associated with RLEP are doing the trespassing.
That's correct. I would say it probably needs to be brought to the attention
I
of the
want to
organization.
be clear for the record, there was no trespass.
There was no trespassing. They were on park property, but I can speak for myself saying that I think that if we will continue to do dark skies events, we have to have adequate supervision there, whatever that is.
Right.
And we have talked about maybe hiring an off-duty deputy, somebody to just be there. Because if we're going to continue doing these things at night and we're relying on volunteers but nobody's raising their hand to come,
Right.
then we're having an issue, and we need to make sure that if we're doing this, that we're not creating an issue. And so that's part of the discussion that we're
That
having
sounds
now.
really good.
And, which I fully support, and I think we're all kind of congealing on the same idea that, hey, there's a way to do this.
That's a good solution.
I volunteered to help Lieutenant Jenkins with a bid with all my spare time.
That's right, and we're
Oh,
with the
put the fence
privacy
up.
fence, with the privacy fence.
All your spare time?
Yes.
Yeah.
Gary's gonna be sitting in his truck out there every night, that's the pleasure game.
Public Safety Committee, Mr. Frazier, do you want to
Well, I wasn't in person last night at Zoom, but I think that we discussed quite a few topics, but I guess the biggest one was the agreement that we just approved as a board. And then they were talking about the calls, the responses, and I don't know. I just wish that we could get volunteers to work together, and that volunteers thought that the county was actually working with them. 25 years ago, I think it was, I tried to do a fundraiser, and they wouldn't work together. So I don't know. It's
So in that vein, one of the things that was discussed was the strategic planning process and an outside group that the association could maybe trust, and that the association, Mr. Nick said he was adding it to the executive committee agenda to
the
try to
same
work
thing that
on
was
that.
done a couple of years ago, that JET or
Well,
whatever it was.
maybe, I don't know if it's a corporate thing or it's a revered professional. Ms. Smith spoke of one from Clark County, somebody that everybody can listen to and know that that person or firm understands their perspective. So, as was discussed here at your last meeting, trends are trends, and they've been happening for decades with volunteerism, and it gets harder and harder to get certified, and we ought to have a long view collaboratively with the volunteer companies on what does that mean for our citizens? And how do we best react now to put ourselves in the best position later, all together? That's easy to say.
It is. But I have hope, because the citizen is the one that's going to either win or lose.
Well, the citizen is paying for it, whether it's volunteer or paid. It's just how much are we going to pay, and what kind of service will we have for what we pay for?
And hopefully we're paying with dollars and not our life.
Yep. Rules Committee,
Did not meet.
Didn't mean.
Planning Commission update. We don't have one. Do you have one? Well, we were all together.
As I noted earlier, email correspondence earlier today suggested that there will likely be a work session next Wednesday to, I think, try to wrap up the sign ordinance. Obviously, there's a lot of other stuff going on, so getting that off the list would be nice for them to get to a point where they are comfortable with a document that they feel is ready for a public hearing. Now, I'll be there because I've kind of been the scribe and keeping the master document. One of the things I'm not sure about is whether the board wants to see it before it goes to public hearing for the planning commission. Because it's just a waste of time if it goes to public hearing at the planning commission and then gets to you and you say, that isn't it. So I don't know how you want to, if you just want to look at it on the planning commission agendas and see, review it informally, or you want to have another joint meeting specifically on that topic.
Probably.
That's something that needs to be worked out.
Um,
And Ms. Smith, I guess, can have that crosswalk between the two bodies.
yeah.
Fire Levy Board, you met.
Fire Levy Board, we met, this week, last week? And we, so companies 5 and 9 did not have their receipt books with them. So Chair Stenner asked them to come back, which is part of the updated policy. Sperryville was not there, Sperryville Fire was not there. They were unaware that the fire levy was having a meeting. So we had to reschedule for later this month to have everybody back. Well, I should say 5, 9, and 2 to go over their receipts. And in addition to that, we will, Chair Stenner sent it back to the chiefs to hopefully bring it back so that we could cover the remaining business that had not been attended to, which is language regarding community outreach, recruitment and retention, and education, sort of line items for those for not reimbursement, for approved expenditures. And so hopefully we'll go over that as well. And Mr. Curry, can you remember or?
Yeah, those are the items, and
Anything else?
the request has gone to Chief Burke and President Nick and they passed it on to all the other chiefs to provide some input on the fire levy guidelines that the board last adopted in 2021. And so they're asking the chiefs to recommend any additional changes they think are appropriate. The fire levy board will chew on it and then kick it up to the board of supervisors to review potential changes to what is an eligible expense and what is not an eligible expense.
Right, and I can say that one of the big points is travel to and from training, which is not currently covered, but it seems reasonable.
It's
but-
covered if it's mileage for a car.
Mileage for a car, but otherwise it's, right, exactly.
Silent
And meals
in
are
other-
not covered.
yeah.
But lodging is covered. So then there's a big discussion about, you know, how should we treat
So
this?
do we want to get people trained or do we not? I mean,
Right.
how much do we want to get people trained?
Right.
And so Mr. Garcia from Company 7 took the train to
Greenville,
South Carolina to finish his practicals for EMT, which is probably cheaper than driving. But there's a question is, if he drove, he could put in the mileage, but is the train allowable? And so,
Right, and it makes
does it really matter to us? The benefit is there's another EMT.
Right. Well, you could reimburse for an equivalent or lower expense than
Right.
mileage.
So there's a few things. And then, Company 1 bought like coloring books for the elementary school. Well, certainly, that's something that the
Right.
board would support. Well, it's not allowed. So
Right.
maybe that should change.
All right, thank you. Treasurer's reports, still looking good.
Yeah, you see the full impact of the ARPA money and the kind of that public safety payroll money here, as well as the collections over forecast and sales tax last year. So your cash position is very high right now. $1 million of that could easily go away for broadband, right? The board allocated $715,000 plus up to another $300,000. So, consider that when you're looking at this right off the top.
Well, it will go away.
Will
It's
go.
not that it could go away.
Just don't know when.
Well,
In October,
700,000 will.
It will go
Up to
away.
300.
yeah.
The other up to 300 is subject to depending on whatever else comes in. So, but it's obviously, this is working capital that you can invest in these projects, like the $1 million you put in towards these buildings. Is that $1 million is sitting here in this chart, right? That's here. And so if you spend that $1 million, then the line goes down $1 million. If you spend the broadband $1 million, the line goes down $1 million. So the ultimate question, and one that Ms. Jewell will work on with the Rules Committee, some policies. So just how much can you take off the table for those one-time uses, and what needs to stay as your minimum? And there's some policies around that the board wants to use, so that if strange things happen, you have the cash flow to make it happen before an insurance recovery comes in. But otherwise, you're not just holding on to citizen tax dollars, you're investing those dollars.
Building permit.
Nothing.
That looked like it slowed down a little bit.
Yeah.
Zoning, emergencies, VDOT monthly report.
There is an added, the Culpeper Soil and Water Conservation District notice. If you're in the right area of the county, you can get some really valuable dollars to fix, expand your septic system. So if you're in or around the Rush River drainage area, you should really look into that if you have any issues with your septic system.
How do you find out if you're within that?
Call these guys or email. Call my office.
So
There
you
you
just
go.
need the address, I guess.
948-7531. Of course, you're gonna have to dial 540 for
Is it
that.
just the Rush River watershed?
I
It was limited to,
believe so, but
I think
there
it goes
are
around
typically
that.
other programs available.
Yeah.
So just,
Yeah,
you call that office, they'll find a program that might
Yeah,
work. for
but I think it usually, kind of gets initiated with bad
you. A
septic.
couple years ago, there was impaired waters in that area, right? Maybe not now, but
I think it
the
moves
money
around.
trails
It's
that
been the
and-
Hazel River, it's been here, it's been there, but like, I don't think that they replace your well, but they may replace your well if you also have a failed septic system.
Yeah.
I think that's the key, is a failed septic
there's
system.
real money available, tens of thousands of dollars to help you with your septic system.
That's fantastic.
Or no septic system.
matters presented by the board. Mr. Frazier.
I don't think I have anything right now that we haven't discussed earlier.
Ms. Smith?
We're gonna have a busy month in Piedmont District. We've got the farm tour coming up on the weekend of the 24th and 25th, and also the John Jackson Festival on the 24th. So there's a lot of goings on in the community throughout September and October. It also occurred to me to mention, I saw a drinking water testing clinic is being offered by the Virginia Cooperative Extension Office for folks that are interested. You can contact their Culpeper office, but that's eligible for Culpeper, Fauquier, and Rappahannock counties. It's a $50 test, and you take it to Remington, and they'll run your water sample for a water quality check. Thought that was great.
Do you know what water quality, is it bacteriological or is it chemical?
I just turned it off.
bacteriological.
Yeah, let me
I would
see.
guess.
I'll tell you, they test for iron, sodium, fluoride, coliform bacteria, manganese, copper, pH, E. coli, sulfate, nitrate, total dissolved solids, lead, hardness, and arsenic.
Got it.
So, really good test and an opportunity some folks have taken advantage of and felt like it was very worthwhile.
Maybe you don't want to know.
And then maybe you don't want to know.
Yeah.
Sometimes these
Nope,
reports have really, really small numbers that can freak you out, but they're really, really small.
Yep.
If they find anything like that in the water,
You may be eligible for one of those Rush River.
I think I'm good.
You're good? Yep. I don't think I have anything either. Yeah, so recess until 7 PM. That's good. 5:41.